What is up, guys? Welcome to the Next Level Esports podcast, the #1 podcast for esports coaches. My name is Donny, and today is a very special day because we got Peter Dunn on the show, former head coach and head of coaching staff for Evil Geniuses. And today he will share his 2 years of experiences with us. Peter stated on Twitter that he won't be returning to NA, if ever, but has many thoughts from his experiences there, being observant in the LCS. He invited anyone to have a discussion. So, Peter, here we are, and thank you for doing this. How are you doing today, Peter?
Hello, Donny. Thank you for having me on. Not too bad. As you can see, I'm back home for the off season. No longer in the esports sphere. Back home with the family. Being put in the attic. But but very, very glad to come on, and very happy to have to talk some esports, to talk some North American esports, and maybe some global esports coaching too. So yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, amazing. And, I think every human being on the world has an attic or a room like yours, right? It shows your human side. We are all human. Like, this looks very, slick, but I have that room as well in my house, but I won't show it, right? I got my camera put here, right? It's for a reason. You don't want to look at my desk. So, it's all good. So, Peter, we have, I think, a lot to cover, right? You've stated on Twitter, there was already, you answered a lot of questions already, but I really want to go into the details, your thoughts and your processes and everything, what happened the last 2 years, as much as we can. So to start right off, right, I think it's good for the audience to start at the beginning, right? We got time, we have a podcast. So where did it all start before you moved to NA? What were your thoughts going into moving NA, and where did it started?
Okay, so a little bit of my history in esports. Basically, I don't come from a gaming background at all. I come from an academic background. Both my parents are diplomats. I studied. I did my undergraduate in the UK, and then I did my master's in China with the intention of going into career in maybe a think tank somewhere between EU and China, political relations.
Right.
When I was in China, I got involved in the esports scene through basically a chance encounter. I was helping to coach the university football team. They won a tournament. I just happened to meet somebody at the celebratory dinner who had some idea about getting involved. And whilst I was in China, I was working. I was living in China, studying in China, and that's kind of how I got my start. That's how I knew esports was a thing.
Right.
Never a thing that I considered doing, but it was a thing that I did. Sometimes doing things in my spare time, doing things on the weekend. And then after in 2013, I just left China. I finished my time there, my studies there. Came back to Europe and just thought, okay, I'm never getting involved in esports again. It was a really nice thing that I did at university, as we all did. And then I came back to Europe, worked for Hasbro for a couple of years on their board game designing, gaming designing department. Real life games, tabletop games, not
for sure.
not online games. And then after I was there for a couple of years, I got approached by a coach from Brazil who heard about my history in China and basically invited me to come and do it. It was a time of transition for me at the time. We had some family illness that led to me leaving China. I saw the opportunity. I thought, okay, what can it hurt? Give it a year, see how things go.
That's where most of these stories start, right?
Exactly.
Give it a go, and then oops.
Oops. And then 1 year, it started as a 1 year thing, became a 2 year thing in Brazil. Came back to Europe, thought I was going to retire at that point. And then a European team came and heard about what I'd done in Brazil, and then that became a 3 year thing in Europe on Splice and Mad Lions. In Brazil, it was INTZ, of course. And then 2 years in NA. I will say, after I left Mad Lions, it was the first off season where I actually considered, okay, now I'm seriously going to be looking for another team. That's kind of my history. That's kind of my history beforehand. I'd say that, because of this, I kind of have a little bit of an insight into how things are run, although maybe some of my views on Brazil and China at this point, 6 or 7 years old at this point, so maybe a little bit
Yeah.
out of date, but obviously you keep in touch with people in the scene. And it's just, no, it's just interesting, like something that obviously you can already hear from my academic history. I wanted to work in EU-China relations, so I went to China to study political relations because I wanted to see how it was taught and how it was studied in China. And same sort of thing with esports. I want to come to a different region so that I can understand how the region functions, so that I can understand what the processes are in the region, what the thought processes, what the roster construction ideas are, what the team environment ideas are. And for me, when I come to a new region, I want to talk to as many different coaches as possible, as many different players, just because this is, on the one hand, it's my job, right, to be a coach,
Right.
to understand things, but on the other hand, it's just my personal, academic curiosity, right? How does Brazil work? How does Europe work? How does North America work? And I think it would be very hard for me to coach in Korea, to be honest, because of how the Korean esports scene work. But I know Yamato can coach in Korea, so any Koreans
Yeah.
watching this, get in touch. I'd love to work in the fourth major region. But no, this is kind of my background. And yeah, I've been spending 2 years in North America, and I'm heading out from North America now. And yeah, interested to hearing your questions and to sharing some thoughts about North America.
Yeah, well, what you just explained, right? Of wanting to learn about cultures. For me, it's like you are a coach that values different perspectives, right?
Yeah,
If you've been on both sides of the coin, then you can truly say what works or what doesn't work, or working with all these cultural differences. I think that can be really an advantage, and this cultural experience, of course. And I like in esports, you have many coaches that worked overseas or in different countries, but being like in different continents is a whole different perspective type of thing. So I really can imagine that really enriches your perspective on esports, or on life in general, and that you also take all of that experience with you. So right, this is a little bit of your background, right? So when you move to NA, right? Did Evil Geniuses contact you like, hey, Peter Dunn, we loved your work, or did you have relationships there? And what was your initial like intention or thought moving to NA with Evil Geniuses?
so I think that, I like I said, when in 2020, at the end of the 2020 season, I think I've told this story before on Mad Lions, but basically in 2019, I plan to retire, for the third time. uh, but at that time, it was Splice were going from a transition from Splice into Mad Lions, with the Overactive Media Group. And there was a talk about, you know creating a process to hand over transition, um, from the from the kind of coaching infrastructure that was in place in 2019, into the new system, right? And
Right.
which of course we can see on Mad Lions right now on the Mac. I'm going to be honest, 2019 was a really rough year. I mean, Splice went to the quarterfinals of Worlds, but I think a lot of players have gone on the record, and coaches have gone on the record as well, saying, we were not a good team that year. We like struggled in scrims. Team environment wasn't always the best. It was
Right.
it wasn't like everybody hated each other, but the fact that the team was able to perform at such a strong level internationally, maybe it was a good indicator for how strong Europe was back in those days. But it was a really taxing and a really tiring year, despite what many people may consider positive results. We got quarterfinals of worlds.
Right.
It's not a bad result, right? And at the end of that point, I was like, why am I doing this anymore? It's
It's
just,
so taxing, right?
yeah, it's extremely taxing, extremely taxing. And I mean, it's worth noting that a lot of people, left that team and when they're other ways. And basically, it was going to be a fresh start going into 2020. And basically, I was brought in. I was given a new role, basically, which was kind of a head of coaching staff to oversee the project. But it was very clear from the start of 2020 that this would be the last year, and then I'm handing over to Mac. Right?
Right.
And there was no problem with this for me. I was like, okay, I really, really, really admire Mac. He's basically one of the coaches that I respect the most in the entire scene, definitely in the West.
Hmm.
There's very few people I acknowledge more than him, both as a human being, I mean, as a League of Legends coach, but as a human being. So a lot of that year was spent in transition, with the intention to walk away at the end of the year. But I will say that 2020 lineup, it had four rookies and Humanoid, who was a second-year player, but who had been the rookie the year before, and those guys were that's the most fun I've ever had in my career. I think Kazi, Arome, Shadow, Kaiser, Humanoid as well, but obviously, like he was a bit more experienced at this point. Those guys together, they were like, you would come into work every single day really excited to see what we were going to work on next. And this was the coaching staff too, right? We had Mac, we had Cass, we had a person called Till Verneman, who was our, I guess, general manager slash team manager. But every single person on that team always joking around, always looking out for each other when things were going rough.
Right.
The coaches coming in every day. I've seen this new game. Let's go and discuss this thing. Yeah, it's the perfect dream environment, and obviously a lot of that goes credit towards Matt. As well, but after that, I was like, okay, this is really, really fun. Maybe 2019 wasn't how esports has to be. Maybe I can enjoy. Maybe this is something which can be
Right.
enjoyable. And then kind of my thoughts going into the 2020 season were, okay, so what now? And it was very clear to me that after working with those guys, I didn't want to coach against them. I really didn't want to coach against Mad Lions. I mean,
Why not? Why not?
it's just kind of, you're leaving. Like, I don't know. Like, for
Your
me,
baby.
it felt like you're leaving your friends behind, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something, I'm on good terms with Mad Lions. I support them all the time, except not at once this year.
Yeah.
But when you've been through those kind of things together, and to be clear, that was a team which everyone thought was going to be a seventh, eighth place team at best. And the 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 way that those guys worked together, they interacted with each other. It was just fun. And like, sometimes in esports, we're so focused on the end results, we're so focused on the processes. Sometimes we just forget that fun is a good thing to have. I mean, at the end, so I had a long think. I had options outside of esports. I had a long suffering PhD, which is a bit of a meme at this moment because I was doing a part-time PhD whilst I was working at Hasbro.
Hmm.
Which is never going to be finished. I probably have to restart it again. So like, all the things I was writing about are basically out of date.
Long overdue.
Long overdue. 7 years. You can't leave it for 7 years. But what I would say is that I had options. I could go back into academia. I could go back and work in conventional business environment. I had offers from certain companies to work with. But my thought was, okay, let's see what other options are involved in esports, right? I made it very clear I wasn't going to come back to Europe, so I did a looking for team post, and that looking for team post was basically targeted at three regions, right? It was targeted
Mm.
at North America, it was targeted at Korea, and it was targeted at China, right? Those were the three places.
Right.
Either to go back to see how things had developed in China over this, how long have I been away? 5 years since then,
Yeah.
because obviously it was beginning to explode in China. Back when I was involved in the Chinese scene, it was literally five friends and maybe a coach or something. You
People
got
forget that 5 years, 5 years back, it was like dinosaurs were walking around in esports. Like, people forget that we came from so far, right?
yeah,
5 years is a lot in esports
exactly.
terms.
Like, you got your taxi fare, you got your like lunch,
Yeah.
and that was it. And it was fine. It
Yeah.
wasn't my primary job. Um, but but uh, but how would I say? So at the time, and obviously Brazil. I have very close links to Brazil, and I talked to some Brazilian teams as well in that off season. And if I couldn't find a good match, I would just leave. Right? I was
Yeah.
thinking, okay, what is it? What's available? And if this isn't available, I've got a job offer here. I'm just going to take that job offer and leave it.
Right.
It's not an issue. And there was interest, right? I interviewed with like six different North American teams, and I interviewed with a few Brazilian teams, a few Chinese teams, and no Korean teams. But in fairness, I didn't do any Korean translation of my post.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the end, I decided on EG. Why did I decide on EG? It's because North America is somewhere that I've been very fascinated about. Because obviously, when you're in Europe, you hear everything that's awful about North America. You know, North America is kind of like the
Yep.
little brother. You know, the European teams like to
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Well done. You
yeah, yeah,
tried.
yeah. You know, like you got to put them back into line when they misbehave.
Yeah.
But there were so many things at the time. This is when North America was going through like its, to quote Reginald, TSM Reginald, you know, it's imports, imports, imports,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. There was
Uh,
quite some drama there.
yeah, quite some drama, but that was the off season where Perks, yeah, it was Perks went to North America, Sword Art went to North America, but there'd also been like many players before then who'd gone from like top European teams to North America. Um, you know, Boxer, another one. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
think who else off the top of my head. But you know, Boxer went from a World Championship final to TL, and you know, at the time, that was a big deal, right? Obviously, it didn't work out for him in North America, but you know, it was a big name signing, and something that always interested me is that every time I would listen to anyone talk about North America, and this included, you know, North American pros, they would
Hmm.
always say, you know, that everything in this region is messed up. You know, there's no talent in North America. There's no players here. You know, everything is kind of doomed. The only way we can we can get out is to buy our way out, right? Essentially,
Yeah. Just get imports. Just
yeah,
give
just
the bag of money. Get talent from
yeah.
overseas.
And for me, this didn't make this didn't make any sense, right? It didn't make any sense from my sports coaching background. Didn't make any sense from what I'd seen in Brazil, from what I'd seen in Europe. Like I just
Yeah.
couldn't believe it, right? Like, you know, I think I went on a show with Thorin and I can't remember who else it was. Maybe Thorin and Veteran. And something that I remember that we were talking about on the show was this idea that there's no NA talent, right? Because NA
Yeah.
player base is what, 1/3 of the EU player base, which isn't true. You know, it's the ranked population is 1/3, but you know, there's a lot of casual players that, for whatever reason, haven't been managed to transfer into competitive players.
Hmm.
You can argue, you can discuss why that is, but you know, there's an issue there in appealing to the wider audience.
Yeah.
But you know, it didn't make sense. Like, even if, let's say, you didn't have that many players, okay, maybe that would explain why you didn't have a caps. But at this point, there were like five super young players coming up in Europe, right? There was Larson, Abadage, Humanoid, Nemesis, and of course, caps was 1 year before them,
Hmm.
right? And you know, it didn't make sense that there was no. Maybe you don't find a caps, right? Maybe you don't find a Humanoid, right? Maybe you don't find a Nemesis. But where's your Larson? Where's your Abadage, right? Like, where
They
is the
should be
NA?
there.
Yeah, they should be there, right? It doesn't make logical sense that there's no that that you need to the best you can do as a North American team is to hire like the fifth best mid laner in Europe, right? It doesn't make sense, and
Yeah.
that's no slight to Abelage. Abelage is a really good player, you know, like,
Right.
um, but it didn't make sense to me, and I was kind of wondering, is it as bad as people think, right? So that was the intellectual curiosity part. The second part was also, you know, that is, as a coach, your dream is to go and, you know, it's very fun to go and coach like a super team, you know, with uh
Hmm.
you know, all the star players in every kind of single
Yeah.
position. But at the end of the day, what I can't talk for all coaches, but what I as a person want to see is I want to be part of a project which I can help develop. You know, like I want to know that my contribution is valuable and my contribution is valued. And this is one of the reasons why I've always leaned towards more teams, you know, that are starting a project, that are developing a project early on within the cycle, because that's what appeals to me.
Right.
It's, you know, my at this point, I'm not in esports for I'm not in esports for the money. I'm not really in esports for the fame. You know, I can go away and do something else, right? Like,
Hmm.
and it's, for me, the reason I'm involved in this is because basically what the esports industry is it's selling dreams. And this is a weird. Like, I thought about it before I came onto this podcast, but if you think,
It's quite deep, but I think, like, for me, it immediately resonates. It is true. So, what is your thought about that dream?
yeah, because I mean, what we're essentially saying is to especially in the West. In the East, it's different. Like
Mm.
it's a lot more developed. But it's saying to a 15-year-old kid or 16-year-old kid who has a talent that has typically been really undervalued. Because let's say in America, especially, they hugely value their sports teams. Like
Yeah,
you go to
big.
college, you're like the best basketball player in your state. Everyone interested in you. You go to the even if you don't make the NBA draft,
Yeah,
I said
you can be very,
very
hallelujah.
famous, you're acknowledged, you're recognized, you're celebrated, right?
Yeah,
And this is kind of what esports, in my opinion, is in the West, right? It's the opportunity that you have a really good skill set. You are like amongst the top 0.0001%. It's not 0.1%. You are like in the tiniest of
yeah,
tiniest uh, peak in your industry, and esports is saying you can have that too. You can be the superstar. You can be somebody who goes internationally, who stays in the nicest hotels, still not business class or first class travel, but you're going to go in a nice hotel. You're going to go in front of a stadium in front of 50,000 people who are cheering
right.
your name. And this is something which you can do as a career, right? This is something which you can aspire to. This is something which is valuable. This is something you can be valued by doing this, and you can be recognized by doing this. And this is something which, for me, like that's essentially what we're offering. Like the money is nice, right, to the players, but what when I talk to players, especially rookie players, they're not thinking about that when they come into their careers. What they're thinking about is,
Yeah,
I want to be the best. I want to I want to be the best. I want to be recognized for being the best. And for me as a coach, that's essentially my job, right? My job
yeah.
is to help those people, like, it's so cheesy when I say it out loud, but help those people achieve their dreams, right? Like it's, put the
It is
tools in
true.
front of them, put the processes in front of them, teach them how to play the game, but also teach them how to learn to play the game so that they can continue that success. They can continue to have ongoing success, and put the structures around them to find that success. And going to North
Exactly.
America from Europe, right? It was about, okay, clearly there is something wrong, right? Because there's no option. If you are North American, especially if you're North American mid laner, you have literally zero chance, right? Like there's I mean, to give an idea of how bad things were, there was a mid laner called Five Fire, okay, and Five Fire is now retired, or he's casting. I think he's doing something outside esports. But
Yeah. Also, I see him for on Twitter sometimes.
yeah,
Doing individual coaching as well or something.
yeah, he does, but I don't think he does this full time anymore. But to
Oh,
give you
okay.
an idea of how bad it was at the time, I actually talked to Fire between spring and summer, and this was in the middle of the COVID pandemic, right? So
Right.
the visa situation couldn't work. But I think we were making a change with our mid laner in academy. I think Hatrick's. Wait, was it Hatrick? I can't remember. But we were. My mind is fuzzy, right? But we
Mm.
were making a change from our mid laner between spring and summer in 2020, and we talked to Fire. Like we were like, how would you like to come to Europe?
Yeah.
And it didn't work out for all kinds of reasons. But no North American team came to him and said that, right? Like this is a European team going to a North American player saying, "Hey, you've got some
Yeah.
talent," and that's really like didn't sit right. And then there were two players at the time who were North Americans. So I tend to watch a lot of regions. I watch as many regions as I possibly
Of course. Right. Yeah.
can. But there were two North American players that I really was interested in at the time. One was Five Fire, and the other one was a player called Shaden, who is on C9 Academy right now. And those two
Mm.
players were like, okay, there is some talent here, right? Like I don't accept, and the reputation about both of those guys is they're a little bit toxic. But I was like, I found out stories about them. I was like, this is nothing. This is like, if you're in
Yeah.
Europe, this is nothing compared to what I've seen over the past
Uh,
3 years in Europe. So I can't believe it. Like this must be an excuse. And then yeah, so that's what led to me wanting to go to North America. Thinking, what is wrong here, right? Like there's clearly something wrong, and obviously, as a coach whose main motivation is that what I've described, there's nothing better. In terms of a project, there is, if you had to write a job description for like what my ideal job would have been, that would have been it. Like you go to a region where the processes are clearly broken, where everyone thinks that there's no North American talent at all, and the only way you can possibly do anything is to import. And even the teams that were the bastions of North American talent, even Cloud9, right, who were like the team that was famous for developing North American players, even Cloud9 went to Perks, you know, in 2021, right? And for me, coming to a region like that and seeing what I could do, like that's just the ultimate test, right? It shows what do you have. Do you have the ability to make any impact in a region like this? And for me, that was it was really clear, right? That of the options,
Yeah.
North America was the best. I then interviewed with 6 North American teams, and I was like, maybe not. I'll be honest. The first 4 teams I interviewed with were shocking. E.g. with the 5th team I interviewed with, and then the 6th team weren't that bad either.
What made it bad for you? Like to stand a little bit still, right? Because I would like to have like your stories and experience also be shared for other, coaches that are following your footsteps.
Sure.
What can they learn from your stories? What do they have to look out for in the process of becoming an NA coach? And
Okay.
what are some things to look out for from your perspective? Like, okay, this is something to look out for. Why yes or why no?
Okay. So that's a very broad question. Maybe I can do a piece and then piece by piece, and maybe if you've got further
Yeah,
clarifications, we
sure.
can go into that. But basically, the thing that happened in North America. So like I said, I interviewed with 6 teams, and the first. Basically, I'm not an ex-pro player. You know, the only thing that I've done competitively, the only thing pro gaming thing that I've done in my life is, I was a Magic, the lowest. I mean, like an ERL, not even like a French ERL, like a
Yeah,
Italian ERL level,
yeah,
right, of Magic Pro, right? Like, I went to the Pro Tours. They paid for my travel, they paid for my accommodation. I got a little bit of travel expenses, but I wasn't the guy winning 50,000 in Magic.
exactly. Yeah,
But I was pretty decent. But I was. They have a rating system back in the day, and I was consistently top 100 of Magic players in the world,
that's
maybe
pretty good.
top 20. At my peak, like I think the highest I was no, not like 22 or something. I think was the highest that I ever got by ELO rating, so by the chess rating system.
Mhm.
But not like I'm not going to say I was the faker. Like I was nowhere close to faker. I was like I'm just trying to find a way that
Faker
I
of
can
magic. Okay.
like who's a player that I really appreciated? Chip Happy. I was the Chip. Like okay, I don't know.
Yeah. I know. I've worked with Chapapi.
Okay, I was the Chapapi of Magic the Gathering, and that's not an insult to Chapapi. Chapapi knows I love him. Like
Yeah.
and I've learned a lot from his Zerath gameplay more than like anyone. But
Yeah.
that's kind of the level, right? So that I don't want to exaggerate, but that's kind of like my kind of pro gaming background. It wasn't, but I kind of understood what it took to push yourself to be the best. But I was never a pro in League of Legends. I'm awful at playing computer games.
Mm.
My Twitch mechanics are all. I didn't. I raised when I was in school. I played conventional sports. I played football. I played cricket. I played rugby.
Yeah.
Bit of hockey, but like field hockey, not ice hockey, because British. But that's kind of that's kind of what I did, right? So I didn't have that gaming background. I in terms of games that I can play well, I can play. I'm pretty good at Civilization and like
Using the brain,
yeah,
basically.
exactly turn based, but anything which
Yeah. Highly strategic, like highly
exactly,
strategic.
exactly.
Yeah.
But put me playing a fighting game or League of Legends or something, I just cannot play the game. My brain and my hand don't listen to each other. Like
Yeah.
I know the right thing to do, and I just can't execute it. Also worth saying, I'm also a bit older than a lot of the coaches and the players. I'm 35 now,
Yeah.
and a lot of the people that I've worked with, Jojo's like half my age now. Yeah, he's half my age.
Yeah.
So so for me, it was really puzzling when I was interviewing with these teams. I don't have a pro background, right? You know literally nothing about me as a coach. So
Yeah.
why aren't you testing me on the things on these kind of things? Why aren't you testing my in-game knowledge? Why aren't you?
So what you're saying, like those teams didn't test your game knowledge or anything like that at
Yeah.
all.
But the interviews were just so polite. Like this is the thing which I couldn't understand, right? This is the thing,
Mm.
because maybe it was because I was a well-respected member of the community. Maybe it's because you know I had lots of recommendations from people because I know that I got good references and recommendations, but they were just so polite in the interview. They were just like, oh, tell me about this idea, Peter. Oh, that's such a good idea. Oh, why didn't I think about that?
Yeah.
How are you testing me? Like here, it's almost like the team is trying to
Mm.
pitch their project to me, but you don't know anything about me. You have literally zero idea about. You don't know if I know nothing about League of Legends. You don't know if I'm like some snake oil salesman that just goes on that knows how to like present themselves publicly. So why aren't you testing me? And I just
So
couldn't
you need to be
understand.
challenged,
You need to be
right?
challenged, right? And for me, this was really, really concerning, right? Because if this is how
Right.
you're hiring me, how are you hiring other people, right?
Yeah.
And and I'm not sitting in on other people's interviews, but this is something which was on Mad Lions, which is something on EG. The interview process, which we go through on EG, is brutal. Like, I mean, maybe we'll talk about it a bit more
Yeah.
later, but maybe I can give an idea for the Mad Lions thing. Like for Mad Lions, as if the rumors are to be believed, they've gone through situations where they will literally fly you internationally in the morning on like a 6 a.m. flight and interview you at the airport and then send you back home. To
What?
see how you handle like that. That's well, I don't know if that was for every coach they interviewed, but like there's at least two coaches who've mentioned that story to me, like the year after I left, which is amazing, right? Like that's like
Like
proper.
I'm like, what?
But
How
I
is
mean,
that even humanly possible in the right mind?
but,
Like,
but that is
why?
that
Yeah.
kind of thing where you're really testing someone, pushing them to the limits. Is the best thing that I could possibly imagine. I assume they did that with everybody, but I've only heard two coaches who told me the story, right? Um, so,
Right.
but it gives you an idea of the idea of the kind of stress you want to put somebody under into an interview. Because if you cannot handle me yelling at you, well, no, I'm not yelling at anyone, but me pushing you really, really hard and asking you difficult questions, what's going to happen in week 8 of like summer split? You're playing for
Yeah.
playoffs. The team atmosphere is awful, well, or relatively awful because everyone
Suboptimal, to put it nicely.
everyone is stressed. Everyone knows that their entire year of work is going to be decided in the next 3 weeks. Tensions are high. People are challenging you. How are you going
Yeah.
to react in that situation, right? Like, how are we testing? How are we deciding if somebody's going to react in that situation? And if you're not challenging me in an interview without knowing anything about me, without testing me on anything, how can you be sure that I'm the right candidate? And this is at the time, um, it was really hard. So this was at the start of the pandemic. So it was looking like Chinese visas were basically not going to be given
Mm.
to Europeans. So it was basically a case of Brazil or North America, unless I wanted to go back to Europe. And I did interview with the European teams, but to be honest, that was never a serious option, right? Like, and I told them at the start of the interview, look, let's have a talk, see if there's anything interesting, but it's basically not going to happen. But let's have a talk, right? But I will be honest, I talked to Brazilian teams, and every single Brazilian team was better than every single North American team that I talked to. I spoke to 3 Brazilian teams for North
You mean
America.
in the interview? Like,
Like
yeah.
what they were asking me, how they were planning to build the projects, the specifics, right? Because obviously
Yeah.
I'm going to ask questions back in the interview, and the specifics that these Brazilian orgs, because Brazil was, I think, entering franchising, about to go franchising. The way
Mm.
that they built these projects, the ideas that they had were actually good ideas, right? They were ideas that I'd heard had found success in Europe. That I just knew from my coaching background. Okay, the way that you're planning to build your youth infrastructure, this is a really good idea. Your coaching infrastructure, how you're going about scouting players, these guys were better than like the North American people. I mean, maybe the worst horror story I can maybe tell you from an interview, I'm not going to name the team or the GM,
Mm.
was I was in an interview with one of the teams, and the GM basically said to me, okay, so I said, okay, so what's my role as a coach? Like, it'd been a long discussion. He was like, okay, we want one of the veteran players on our team to lead review. Okay. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I'm kind of acting as an assistant coach, facilitator for this veteran.
Yeah.
But then my follow-up question then are, what are my KPIs? How do you know if I'm doing a good job? Like, how do you know if I'm participating well? And he said, oh, we'll be able to tell by the results on the stage. And then my follow-up question was, okay, but you're not letting me lead review. You're not letting me, have a
Yeah.
leadership position. How are you going to tell?
You're
How
gonna
many
look
times?
like a fool. Like you're putting your whole reputation on the line if
Yeah,
it goes south without being in somewhat in a position to say like or in control. Like control maybe not the right word, but to say something, have a final say in things.
exactly. And this guy had clearly never he'd never been asked something like this, right? He never had somebody turn around and say, "What are my KPIs?" Right? Because he gave me like a nothing answer, then he fudged it, and then when I pushed him harder, he was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, don't worry, we'll work it out later."
Yeah. Red
Right?
flag.
Come
Red
and sign,
flag.
we'll work it out
Red
later.
flag.
Yeah, and I was like, you can't be serious. Like I left that interview and I literally was almost laughing after I left that interview. I was like, it can't be. It can't, like there's no way. There's no way, right? I mean, like, and
Yeah.
there was no Brazilian team that came close to that. Like all the Brazilian teams were like, okay,
Hmm.
here's a project. Here's what we want you to do. Here's how you can be involved. This is how we want you to train our coaching staff. This is how we want you to train our players. This is the what we anticipate the what's it called the interpersonal relationship of our players, right? So,
Right.
so one team came to me and they had a roster that had three pretty toxic players in the Brazilian community, and I was like, okay, you've got three pretty toxic players. You sure this is going to work out, right? And they were like, oh yeah, but don't worry, like this guy, we know that these guys work together in this way, and they're pretty toxic, but if you approach review in this way towards those players, we know that they're open to ideas, but you're going to have to adjust your coaching coaching strategy in this specific way, and if that's something that you can do, because I said earlier in the interview I was really flexible, but they were like, okay, then you can do good in this project, but if you
Hmm.
can't, then obviously we respect you a
Yeah.
lot, but maybe this project isn't for you, right? And they had these ideas already in their head, and they were talking about it in the interview. We're going really into their scouting processes, and I was just like, oh my gosh, it's actually like Brazil is actually really far ahead of North America at this
Yeah,
point.
it sounds to me like based on your experiences with these interviews that NA doesn't take responsibility, or they also have the wrong people in place that are GM, right? That don't understand what it takes. Do you feel like they study in terms of like quote unquote like the other regions, how they execute on these interviews and stuff to become like professional? Because to me it sounds like we need someone to fix our problems.
Mm,
Do you want to fix our problems? And they're just like, yeah, but we have all of this, all these blockages, all these difficulties put in front of you, and you are able to say yes or no. Like it's such a weird way to conduct like an interview like that.
yeah, no, I fully agree, right? And this is, oh, how should I say this? This is yeah, this is an issue, right? And obviously, like this is only four North American teams, right? So EG was the fifth team, but this
Of
is only
course.
four North American teams, right? So I don't want to say the entire region is like this. I don't want to say every team is like this.
Okay,
But
fair
but this
enough.
was like an alarm bell that was going off in my head, where the first interview was like, okay, fine, this is just a one-off interview. But when you hear this like three or four times, you're like, I mean, something's up here, right? Like something
Yeah.
is really really up, and um, it was just really 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 puzzling.
What would you say is behind it? Why are these LCS teams like? Do you have this sense of like it's part of the NA culture, or there's something going on? What is that something going on? And you also came into I don't know, but based on your story, even though you signed with EG, you wanted to change something in that regard. What was actually what is the problem? You talked about also on Twitter about like systemic issues based in the
Yeah.
system. Like maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like,
Okay.
what, in your opinion, are those systemic issues, and how can you as a coach solve it?
Accountability. Like to me, I think accountability is the major issue, and the problem that you have in North America is that the coach is accountable, right? But the
Mm,
coach doesn't have full control over the project, right? Who at the end of the day is going to be fired if the project goes badly, right? Let's say you have a star player, you have a rookie player, you have
mm.
a coach, you have a GM, you have a team owner, right? Which of those people is not going to be on the org if the project fails, right? It's probably not going to be your star player. Maybe
Yeah,
your rookie player. Maybe your rookie player gets kicked, right? Maybe. Is it going to be your GM?
probably not.
Probably not. Is it going to be your owner? No, because they
Yeah,
own.
it's either the rookie or the coach.
It's either the rookie or the coach, right? Like, and that's basically what's going to happen in your team, right? And
mm,
teams can say anything that they want about this, but this is how it works in conventional sports as well. Like in football, that's what
yeah.
happens all the time in football, right? And it's not
People
like,
forget it's business by the end of the
yeah,
day, right? That
exactly.
is a marketing machine that is, labeled as esports, but it has a different purpose,
Yeah.
for eyeballs and everything. So a star player is something to,
No, of course, of course. And but in football, it's the same, right?
mm,
Let's not blame esports for this, right? Like in football, coaches get fired all
true.
the time, right? Like,
Yep.
and there's no, like, that's just the industry you work in, right? If you're a coach in a sporting industry where these are the incentives of a team, right? Or the incentives of the industry, your job security is completely awful, right? Like your job security, just forget job security. Don't coach if you want job security. Go work in like an accountancy firm or something like this, right? Like you're
Right.
not going, you just do not have job security. But the difference is that in many of these other professions, you get like power to do things, right? Like if
Yeah.
I'm a football coach, maybe I want my team to play a 5-2-3 system, right? So
Mm.
I can talk about football, soccer.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I don't want to play a 4-3-3. I want to play a 5-2-3 system. I want to play three at the back. I'm going to recruit players for that system. I'm going to recruit my coaching staff, to kind of run something like this. And this is how we're going to play the game. And these are how we're going to run set pieces and things like this. Okay. And it doesn't
Yeah.
work. Fine, I'm fired. I'm gone. Right. Like I don't get to work at the club anymore. But I'll get a chance, right? You know,
Right.
I'll get a chance to put my vision on paper. And this, to be honest, since we're talking about issues in North America, this doesn't happen in North America, right? Like, I mean,
You have no control at all as a coach.
yeah, like your agency to do anything as a coach is basically very, very limited. And some coaches have complained about this as it's the fault of the players. But to me, I don't think it's the fault of the players that much, right? Like as a coach, you have to convince your players that this is a good thing to work in, right? And this is
Right.
the same in all industries. And sure, in Korea, maybe it's easy, right? Like there were
Yeah.
times where even Faker has been benched in Korea, and he doesn't go on like social media and go and say my
Yeah.
coach
It's
is
a
a garbage.
disciplined culture, or at least more.
Exactly, right? But they'll give you
Yeah.
time and they'll give you the ability to put your vision. And maybe your vision is rubbish,
Right.
and then it doesn't matter, right? But in North America, there is like zero chance. Okay, that's going to happen. You're going to get pushback, but you get pushback in Europe too, right? Like you get pushback in China too. It's not like an American specific thing. There is something which is American specific though, which is that if your player doesn't like something, they can just go to your org. They go to your org and they go to your GM or to your owner and they go and say, this coach is making me do something I don't want to do. What are we going to do about it? Right? And
Mm.
at that point, your team owner or your team, whoever is in position of authority has a choice for what they want to do. Right?
So
Uh,
there's no integrity there also within the organization.
well,
How
but
I imagine when you come in, you make like expectations, you share them, and then you make agreements based off that. And those agreements and also maybe some rules set or like confinements by the uh, the organization, and maybe you have some demands as well.
yeah,
That's how you find each other. That's where you can keep like the integrity and also the accountability. But
exactly.
doesn't look like it's put it like that.
Yeah. So I would say that this is something which happens in North America a lot more. So firstly, you have an issue where people are faster to assume incompetence, right? Because everyone, like the narrative around North America is everyone is incompetent, right? Everyone is lazy, right? So you just
Mm,
assume the incompetence, so it happens faster, right? Whereas
yeah.
from what I understand about Korea, there's a natural assumption that you assume competence even when the competence isn't there, and somebody has to prove that they're incompetent, right?
Yeah,
Before,
self-fulfilling prophecy
yeah, exactly,
basically,
exactly,
or
right?
wishful thinking, or whatever you call it.
But imagine you're a team owner, right? And you've hired this coach who who you are supposed to have full faith in the coach to run your project, right? Because you've hired them, you've interviewed them, and this is why interview processes are so important because
Yeah.
hopefully you've put hours into doing it. Like when I'm interviewing a coach, I'm interviewing them for 4 hours over 3 interviews, and then I'm talking to their ex players, I'm talking to their ex staff. Like I'm talking to people like not everyone gets 4 hours of interviews, but the coaches who are making it to the final round, they get 4 hours, right?
Yeah,
Under 3
exactly.
interviews, right? So I'm putting time into interviewing this person. I'm making a decision, so I want to have full faith in this guy to run my project, right? Okay,
Yeah,
now
100%.
a player comes to you and they go and say to you, I have an issue with this guy. So now you have a decision to make, right? If your processes are good and you have full faith in your processes, you turn around to that guy and you go and say, this is the guy I trust to run my project. Well, or you think this, right? You go and say, give him time to
Mm,
do it, right? And if things don't work, we'll talk again at the end of the season, right? Because you have faith that
right.
you've picked the right guy and you've chosen the right guy, and that you're
You
going to give him.
must. You must have that
You
faith.
must do it, right? But that doesn't happen in North America. And this is, if you ask me, like the key structural issue
Mm,
is the processes are not good, and people know the processes are not good, right? Because if you have full faith in your processes to pick the right candidate from a large pool of people available, you would trust that person to run the project. Or if you don't want them to run the project, you would trust them to be able to fill a facilitating role, and you would have good KPIs in place to judge if they're doing a good job in a key facilitating role. And this just doesn't exist, right? In Europe, well, maybe I was lucky on the org that
mm,
I was working on, but it was really, really clear. And I mean, to be clear, this sounds brutal, but it's not intended to be brutal. It's just the industry we're in, right? When I was on Mad Lions, when I was on Splice, Splice Mad Lions, same org, and when I was on INTZ, it was very clear, right?
yeah.
At the start of the year or the end of the previous year, we have a talk. Okay, this is the roster that we've managed to put together, or this is your budget that you have. What do you think you can achieve with the budget? Let's discuss on both sides what we think is an appropriate goal with this appropriate budget, right? Okay, let's talk about some progress during the season. How are we going to judge whether you're doing a good job? Okay, at the end of the year, did you do a good job? Right? Like I put power,
Yeah.
I put trust in you to come and run this project. Here's your authority. Here's like, and then obviously you talk back as the coach. Here's how I'm going to delegate my authority. Here are the resources I need. Here's how I want to allocate certain parts of budget, or
Exactly.
what I
Yeah.
need
Yeah. Yeah.
within my playing or coaching stuff, right? And then at the end of the year, okay, you set the expectations. Did you meet your expectations? If you did, great. One more year, right? Did you not meet your expectations? Okay, then you're not
Yeah.
in the team, right? And like, I
Easy
never,
decision, like statistically based. Yeah. More.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like, at no point was this ever upsetting to me, right? Like, it's a competitive industry. I know what you need, right? You're putting a lot of responsibility into me, right? And you're putting but at the same time, you're putting a lot of trust into me, right? So what am I going to do? Right, I'm going to work really, really hard. I'm
Mm,
going to stay up till 4 a.m. in the morning watching LPL, as I was doing kind of every day in North America, right? Because of the time difference, and I will grind myself into the dust for you to help your project work, right? But you have to put the same trust into me, right? And that is what you're missing in North America, right?
yeah.
Like, if people, and I'm not sure exactly what it is because I haven't worked on the
I think
management
so.
side. I've worked on the coaching side. But to me, from what I've seen in the interviews, it's very clear that there's no trust in the processes. But systems, okay. So this is the key thing, right? Like, do
Yeah.
you have faith in your recruitment systems to recruit the best people, right? If you have, then you allow them to do their job, right? But there's
Yeah.
so much negativity around North America right now that there's so many people within the scene that think that they have a solution, right? And it's the next big fix. You fix this one thing, one simple step,
Yeah.
and North America is fine again, right? And it's not. The problem is that if all you're doing is this short term thinking, every time you put all your resources into fixing one thing, you damage something else, right? You cause an upheaval somewhere else, right? And this,
Yeah. So
yeah,
Peter, I'm super interested, right? Because there are so many coaches right now, also in NA. What are some of the solutions or the big fixes that already have been implemented, right? So other coaches can learn from this and stay away from it, or at least have a good reflective moment if they should go through
mhm,
with that
yeah. Okay,
solution.
so first things first, what is the systemic issue, right? Like, what is the big fix?
Yeah,
Well,
what
well,
is
I
it?
mean, for me, the big fix is that you don't have. Uh, Firstly, how do we assess the quality of coaches, right? Because the systems that you have for assessing quality of coaches in North America are basically non-existent. Let's compare
Right.
North America to Europe, right? How do I know? Fantastic example. Crusher has been promoted to Fnatic's head coach, right? He's somebody that
Mm.
nobody has heard of. Literally, like fans who don't follow much League of Legends are like, who on earth is Crusher? I've never heard of him. Why Fnatic promoted some random guy um, into the what is arguably the most prestigious coaching position in the West? Well, I would say
Yeah,
Fnatic goes to, in
probably.
terms of
Yeah.
it's up
It's
there.
up
It's
there.
definitely top three, right? If you're talking about pure prestige as a coach. Why have they put this? Why have
Yeah.
they put this random guy that nobody's ever heard of into this position? Well, like for people that don't know, Crusher he's a Portuguese coach, so he comes from the smallest of the smallest ERL, right? It's not a good ERL. Like with respect to Portuguese players, like
Mm.
you're not that good, and there's not that much budget
Yeah.
in the scene. No, but I mean, obviously there's some good Portuguese players, right? But it's nothing compared to France. People are getting six-figure salaries, right? In Portugal,
It's
in
a little bit
Portugal,
different,
yeah,
exactly.
in Portugal, if you're lucky if you're getting five figures a year, right? Like it's four
Yeah.
figure salaries, if that, right? Compared to
Right.
six figure salaries in France, right? It would be very surprising if somebody who could devote their life to getting a good salary in the LFL was not better than somebody in Portugal. And if you were that good in Portugal, people would immediately be looking for you, right? Like there was a player called Plasma, who was Portuguese and basically was out of Portugal within a year, right? Because everyone noticed how good he was.
Yeah.
Man, I've insulted the entire Portuguese fan base. I'm really sad.
No. It's not. It's the same. Let me add on to that, right? I'm from the
Yeah,
Benelux region, ERL as well, right? It's also like a development type of ERL, and all the talented, just like
yeah,
Chapapi, right? He went also to Spain. Other people went to SK, gaming like Alois or
yeah,
Rako as a coach, right? There are many talents, in these regions. If you got any spark of, talent,
yeah.
zoop, you're teleported out.
um, but yeah, so this is who Crusher. Right, Crusher. He coached in Portugal. He helped a lot of people basically make the trip out of Portugal. Very well respected in his
Right.
community. Worked his way into Spain, was very successful in Spain with like low budget rosters, found ways to make them play good strategic League of Legends, found good like set piece plays, on good dragon setups, good vision setups, the basic
Right.
thing. If you study the games that this coach has done over many many years, like you just watch how his teams play, you can see the similarities, right? There's very noticeable
Mm.
similarities between certain things, especially how he vision setups and support roam things and things. It's very very obvious, right? That this is a team which is coached by this guy, and he's done this for like 4 years, 5 years. He has 5 years of
Yeah.
material, right? Where he's been successful. He's been able to show his impact. Like his players say really nice stuff about him, right? And now he's in the Fnatic position, right? Having worked his
Yeah.
way up through the academy, and like this guy, I don't know if he's going to be successful in Fnatic, but I know he's a good coach. Like I just know, right? I can go
Right.
talk to 20 different players who would tell me he's a good coach. I can talk to like multiple members of coaching staff, and I have that background, and he has that background. If he goes and gets into a fight with like humanoid or somebody, right? You know, he'll be
Right.
able to say, "Look, I've seen this system work. I've seen this thing work in the past." Maybe humanoid turns around and says, "Screw you! I'm not listening to you anymore."
Yeah.
Right?
Baja.
But at least he has that background, that history and that background, right? And a
Yeah.
demonstration that he can convince people that he can contribute, right? And he's shown it. He's demonstrated. I assume he's made some mistakes in his career, but there's no problem with making mistakes because you learn from those mistakes, right? And he's been given,
Exactly. It's
yeah, and he's been
necessary.
given the time to do it. And even if so, he hasn't had any major failures. But let's say he had a major failure in Spain, he could have worked his way up again. It's a step back and then step down. Whereas in North America, you don't have this. Like there's no like if you want to earn a career as a coach, even the amateur system, there's basically no money in it, right? And Riot are trying to
Yeah.
change.
Collegiate is like upcoming, right? You can get experience where you have head coach, but we've all, at least for me, we've seen all the messages throughout Twitter about collegiate
Yeah,
coaching in the US, where it's like a decent salary, but you have like 20,000 responsibilities, right? It's impossible to really develop as a coach as we see
and
coaching.
how and it's not just about that as well. Yeah, it's not just so it is about that, right? It's about the diversification of
Mm.
responsibilities, but it's about your self improvement. Where's your time for self improvement, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
And
impossible.
that, for me, I mean, to be clear, I think collegiate is a good thing, right? And I suspect that this is the route up in the future. Depending on, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the lower leagues in NA, but
Hmm.
historically, there has been no way in North America that you can work your way up. How can you get better? Like the only way, your only option is if you want to earn a living wage, is either to go to a wildcard region, right? The coach that worked with me in Brazil is a player called Abaxio, and he
Mm.
he had he had no options in North America, so he just went to Brazil, right? Like he was just like, okay, I'm going to Brazil. This is my only way up, and he settled in Brazil. He has. I mean, I
Mm.
don't know if if he still has the same partner, but his partner's in Brazil and things like this, right? So like he found his way up, and this was his option, right? So
Yeah.
so so but why did he do that? Because there were no options in North America. And if you're an academy coach, what is a good academy coach? A good academy coach is somebody who can develop players, but it's not necessarily somebody who can win games, right? And that's it's a very subtle distinction, right? Because the coach that you
Really.
want in your academy team is somebody who will get a bunch of 16-year-olds and turn them into potential LCS players, right? That's the best academy coach, right? But the problem is
Yeah.
that team full of 16 and 17-year-olds isn't going to win the academy league, right? So what's on their resume? It's like a seventh or eighth place academy season, right? And that's not going to help them
Yeah.
convince other teams that they should be hired, right? Like the coaches that go up from academy to LCS back in the day are basically the only chance you had is if you won the top 1 to 3 academy teams, right? And you had some players who
Yeah.
vouch for you, and then you could say, "Oh, look, I won the academy league, right? Congratulations, you won the academy league, right? You may have
Yeah.
5, 10 veterans on your team versus the team has a bunch of teenagers, but good job, you won. Congratulations. Now you get your chance to go to LCS. Where what are you going to do now, right? Like you don't have that advantage anymore, and definitely Team Liquid aren't going to recruit you, right? So who are you? Who are you on? You're going to be on the bottom tier, but at least you found a way to get up. But the point is that incentive structure,
Mm.
like all the coaches know this, like people know how to play the game, right? Like if you want to go and work your way up, but then that incentivizes you as a coach to not have rookies in your academy team, right? Because you're not going to get if your goal is
Yeah, because you're looking out for yourself. You want to build a career, and that's different than making a true impact into the
exactly
scene.
right, and in fact, it's harmful to the scene, right? Whereas in Europe, if you want to do this, you
Yeah.
don't join an academy team, right? Like you join an academy team to develop players, but you want to go and win EU Masters, you normally normal not always, like I'm not saying that all like Rogue, AGO Rogue, and like Vitality B and things like this, they also want to win EU Masters, heretics as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there you would never join like Astralis Academy team, right? Like that's not what you would join. You would go and join like Gamers Origin in France, or maybe you go and join LDLC, or like back in the day, Movie Star Riders or Mad Lions, Mad Lions before Mad Lions.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And you can just compete to win, right? You show that you want to win, and that allows the people who are in youth development to not necessarily want to win, and that they can they can demonstrate their skill set in a different way, right? You go and join a lower league, maybe you go and work in Benelux, maybe you go and work in Poland, you go and show like
Yeah. Tier two, sometimes tier three, with some nice
and then
projects,
you show that you
basically.
can develop these kind of guys, but you don't necessarily need to win to demonstrate your skill set. But there's many teams with many goals which allow you to demonstrate different skill sets, and that is we have that in Europe, but it doesn't exist in North America, and so so so
Mm.
so that those are your incentive structures. But then the question is, how do you improve? How do you get better? Right? How do you learn?
Right.
And learning as a coach is basically you have to make mistakes, right? Like there's
100%.
and the problem is you make a mistake in academy in NA, you may never get another academy team ever again. Or like, you make an enemy with a particularly influential player, and that player goes and shit talks you to all of his friends, and then no team will
Yeah.
hire you.
GG.
Right? Exactly. GG. Right? Like you're done. You can't. So how do these coaches get better? And I'll be clear: the quality of coaching in NA is awful. It's really really bad. Uh,
What do right
yeah.
to little bit like put it like there, when you say coaching quality is bad, do you mean like the knowledge, like in-game game knowledge, or is it like the coaching skills, like the interpersonal skills and everything like that? right? Those are two things. But most of the people, when they're saying like, okay, it's about the like, we're usually talking about like the game knowledge. What about those distinctions between those
So
two?
I can actually talk about this in a bit more detail. So firstly, I think it's a combination of the two, right? But I think
Of
there's an
course.
overarching thing which covers both of those areas, right? Which is
Hmm.
that the self improvement processes or the personal improvement processes of coaches in North America is the worst I've ever seen in any region, right? And that fits into both of those things, right? Because it's
Hmm.
about when you talk to a North American coach. Again, I want to be careful. This is not every single North American coach.
Just a
Just
general North
just
American
general North American
coach.
coach.
We're not naming anyone.
Not anyone names it, and not everyone fits into this
Yeah.
profile. And all the disclaimers. I
Average
don't want
Joe.
people to go on Twitter and flame me about this. And you go and say, "What is your self improvement process?" And then like more than 70 to 80% of the coaches are like, "What's a self improvement process?" And then the follow-up question is,
Oh yeah,
it's like.
it's so shameful that we are laughing
But it's
about this,
like,
but yeah, it's actually
I mean,
quite
obviously,
dreadful.
I don't use that word. Like the question I will know, the question, the exact question I will normally use is, okay, as a head coach, if you want to work within my coaching structure, one of the most important things is your own personal coaching development. Okay, so because
Yeah.
I expect you to get better. I tell every coach I work with, the best, most successful thing for me in working with you is that one day I want to be in the LEC or the LCS final, and I want you to be on the stage across from me, either having taken my job or because you've gone to a different team, and I want to be shaking your hand and saying, good luck, right? Like that for me
Yeah.
is success, right? So how can I help you get to that point, right? And what can I as a head coach or what can an org do to aid in your self improvement? And I've heard two good answers from like 60 plus 70 plus coaches that I've interviewed, right? Like normally it's
Wow, that's
like
astonishing.
and to me normally the question is like, I've never thought about this, like why would an org invest in coach, or like and no, so they wouldn't normally ask that. But I had a coach who was working for one org, and who worked for four different orgs. Sorry, he worked for four different orgs. And I asked him this question, and he was like, wait, orgs are willing to invest resources into into boosting their coaches, and he had never had this question asked to him by any org that he'd been on, and like he just didn't know how to answer the
Yeah.
question. And then we talked it through, and then in the end, it was kind of the best thing I could do was maybe talk over ideas with him and maybe introduce him to some one tricks, and talk about how learning process, things like some
Right.
networking, some like questioning of decisions, right? But it took me 20 to 30 minutes to get that answer out of him, because people just don't even think in these kind of ways. And when I talk to European coach about this, even if they're caught off guard by the question, they'll be like, okay, this is some, they'll have some ideas. Maybe the ideas are complete garbage, right? But they'll have some ideas.
Yeah,
um
sure.
and and that is concerning, to say the least, right? So because of this, because okay, so this is the core issue, right? The core issue is the self improvement processes or the personal development processes of coaches in the region is bad. So how do you
Hmm.
normally get out of that system, right? Like let's say, I'm not going to say every Korean coach has a really good self improvement process, because it's not true, right? Like and
Yeah.
same in China. Um, but how do you get out of that situation? Well, you can also learn through duplication, right? So if you are,
Monkey see,
yeah,
monkey
monkey
do.
see, monkey do, and there's no shame in that, right? Like
No, it's a very good
it's
school.
sometimes you just copy what the other guy does, and you get very
Yeah.
good at copying, and then it's good. And obviously, again, not all Chinese coaches like this. Not
Y- No, it's good. Okay, I recently made a tweet and I stated, copying others is good for catching up to a
exactly.
certain level, but it's not enough to become like the greatest innovative, like the championship coach. You have to think about yourself.
Exactly.
But in order to catch up, that monkey see, monkey do is a very, really good
And how
learning
can you do
path.
that? So let's have this. So let's not talk about China and Korea. Let's say Vietnam and Japan, right? Like Vietnam and Japan.
Yeah.
How do you do this? You scrim the Korean teams, right? And you just copy what they do, and you learn from them. And we're not even talking like your Vietnamese team.
Yeah.
You're not scrimming T1, right? You're scrimming T1 Challenger or whatever, right?
Right.
But you just copy what they do, and then you can catch up the gap really, really quickly. And then whilst you're catching up the gap, you can immediately think, okay, what am I learning from this? Like, what am I seeing? What's the kind of innovation that they're going through? And then you learn, right? You learn through imitation, and you learn through the process of imitation. But in North America, you
Yeah.
just do not have that as an option. There's just no way. North America is an isolated region. The only way that you can bring new
Mm.
ideas out is go on a boot camp, right? Hire a
Yeah.
coach from outside, hire players from outside, and then what's your other option? Come and bring people in from sport? Well, okay, how do you, again, if your recruitment assessment processes are bad for recruiting esports people, how are you going to get the right people from conventional sports? Like, it's insane.
Mm.
And the
Yeah.
interesting thing is, in Brazil, they have brought people in from conventional sports, right? From soccer, from volleyball, right? I've spoken to people who worked in
Right.
those. And because their processes for hiring coaches are better, they have a better idea of who can make the transition. And that's just, again, I use Brazil because Brazil is also an isolated region. Brazil is even more isolated than North
Yeah.
America, right? Because it's harder for them to
Probably. Yeah.
hire.
Every time at Worlds, when Worlds comes around, oh yeah, we forgot there are Brazilian teams as well attending.
But the thing is, I'm pretty sure if you put like half the GMs in the Brazilian league in charge of North American teams, the North American teams would do better because they just have more resources, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, and
Mm.
again, this is not throwing shade at EG. I think Andrew Barton is a very good GM, right? Like, I don't have complaints about Andrew Barton, but like
Yeah.
the thing is that that when I've heard people talk about these kind of things, how can you, like, there was a phase in 2014, 2015 where they brought in like tons of coaches from conventional sports, and none of those guys survived,
Yeah.
right? None
No.
of them survived. Now, some of them were doing kind of disturbing stuff, right, which you should have probably scanned better for, but also like their game knowledge was questioned. And again, because you don't have the processes for improving game knowledge, like, or your improvement processes, like good ways to do those things, how do you bridge that gap, right? And that is something that,
Yeah.
when I don't come from a gaming background, so how did I bridge the gap? I spent literally like 16 to 18 hours a day watching League of Legends for years. I'm like, during the season,
Mm.
I'm getting up every day at 10 o'clock. I'm going to bed every night at 4 a.m. And I have to do that because I don't play the game, right? So there's an
Yeah.
understanding that in order to keep up my level, if I want to be a top tier coach, I have to put in more work than my players. I have to put in more work than not just my players. I have to put in more work than other coaches. I have to put more work in than like top Korean coaches. If I'm not working harder, how can I be better than this guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's my way of doing it. I'm sure there's smarter ways of doing it. I look back over my career and see how I was 6 years ago, and I wonder, maybe some of the things I know now, I could have made this much more efficient, and I wouldn't have wasted as much of my time. But how am I getting better? It's because I'm grinding. I'm grinding a ton of games, right? And that.
Let me stop you right there, because I think that's a really interesting question, right? If you had to turn back time, what would you do different as a coach, right? Because I assume a lot of people are watching you, just like other coaches, that are top tier, they are talking and taking things away, but they are sharing their stories about, like, I did this and this and
Mhm.
this and this. But I think there's a really interesting question there. Like, if you could turn back time, what would you do differently to have more efficiency, more progress, or even more results if you look back from all the experience and all the people that you've talked to and all the coaches by
Okay,
now?
so I think the first thing that I would say is taking notes is really important. And this is something which I didn't. I
Mm.
just did it because I read it in a book somewhere. Um, I mean, talk about things. Let's talk about things that were
Yeah.
important, things which aren't important, right? So basically, like at the end of every day, I take notes from the day of scrims. And I have notes from when INTZ was scrimming Dark Passage, with Zerxay and Caps when they were like 15 or 16, back in the day,
Mm.
where I have notes where it says, "Oh, this Caps guy might be a good player one day," because he's a bit of an inter.
Mm.
I can't remember. I don't have the spreadsheet on me right now, right? But when you are, make sure to categorize everything, and there's a side effect of this, which is you can test the player's progress, and you can isolate a player or a coach from their specific environment, right? So often when I'm watching a team
Mm.
or studying a team, like say JDG right now, right? like who's coached by Hom, right?
Yep.
So I'm just like, okay, Hom. I'm watching a Hom team now. What did he do on his? How is this team similar to previous teams he's coached? How are they different, right? And what can I learn about that, right? So that has a side effect, which it helps make your learning process or your duplication process more efficient. In the past, right? So people say you can never tell what a coach does. That's complete bullshit, right? Like you can tell what a coach does.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing to put 24 hours, 48 hours, into like literally just watching all the games.
You just go back
Yeah,
to the history, like the
exactly.
games, and look at the patterns. It's basically data connection
Exactly.
points. Like, okay, point A, B, C, D. Okay, what does it say? Reading between the lines,
Exactly.
basically.
And then obviously if
All
you're
right.
interviewing somebody like that, so obviously I never interviewed him, right? Because I've never been on a team.
Mm.
Like I'm sure he doesn't want to be an assistant coach in North America, but like
Yep.
but do that with an academy coach such as Crusher, right? Like, and you can see what he's doing, right? And then you interview him and you ask him, okay, I noticed these patterns, right? Like, how much of this was you, right? And this is something that you can see a lot, right? So these data points are really important, right? Having data points, knowing
Yep.
what data points are good, knowing what data points you want to take, I think is number one thing, which I didn't do enough of when early on in my career, but the more I do, the more I
Right.
realize how important it was. And it's like you write a journal or a diary. You're told to do that in your high school, and then maybe you're 35 or something, and you go back and find your diary, and you're like, I remember.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing is I think was very important for me. Second thing in terms of efficiency is, okay, so when I was at the start of my career, I would just grind quantity of games. And like
Mm.
when I was starting out, I would literally have 4 games on my screen, and I would just watch 4 of them at the same time, right, on 2 times speed, and I would just, I could track what was going on in all of the games at the same time. That was very good for building my knowledge really, really quickly, but it was bad for my note taking. Um,
Right. Because it's in the magic is in the
Yeah.
details,
So
basically.
to me, when I was at the start of my career, I assumed that it was quantity which would make the gap, but actually, the most important process was the note taking. The note taking and like everything else you were doing was just filling in, was just material for your note taking. But anything you can do
Yeah.
that handicaps your note taking is an issue, right? Further in
Right.
fitting into that, one piece of advice that I always try to give new coaches is you will learn much more from watching a top team beat up a middle table team. Maybe not a bottom table team because the game may be over in laning phase, right? If
Yeah.
like I will learn more from watching Damwon or T1 versus no, not Freddy, Live Sandbox, right? Like in Korea this year, or like watching and
Yeah.
finding a mid-table team that is like pretty consistent in how they play the game, and then studying how top teams take them apart is you learn much more from that than watching, say, DRX versus T1. DRX versus T1 is much more interesting to watch. It's a super fun series, really, really
Mm.
fun final, but you're not actually learn because there's an internal metagame within that series, right? And people adapting to
Yeah.
doing
For sure.
how the other teams go. So the best thing you can do when you're trying to learn about a team is learn about how they take apart weaker teams and have a weaker team that you really like, right? That is the most standard team that you can possibly imagine, and see how the better team takes them apart.
Mm.
Um,
A metaphor that comes into my mind, right, is you have to be like a sort of a counting cards, right, to always have a slight
yeah,
advantage, right? It seems like it's going
yeah,
50-50, but this one team is always, a couple of percentage better while they slowly pick apart this middle team consistently. And those few percentages is what matters and that differentiates between the winning or losing. And you can only find that based what you said into the notes, into the details, looking for quality in the place, like the nuance inside the moment with a lot of data points on the gameplay aspects, and also assuming like the players team coaching behind what is happening
exactly,
there.
100% correct. And I think the follow up to this as well is, so learn learn like one team. Be a specialist in something in one area first, right? Like don't try to diversify too much,
Yeah.
right? And what I mean by this
Mm.
is, if you're trying to learn self improve inside the game, be and you're coming from a space, you're coming from nothing basically, right? You're like a new coach, or you're coach in a maybe weaker region, and you want to improve your game knowledge. The best thing from my experience is be like, approach from an academic perspective. Be the best expert on Kanavi's jungle pathing you possibly can be, right? Understand JDG. Just like
Yeah.
only watch JDG games. Like don't, even if it's like garbage JDG games, watch JDG games
Yeah.
and then be the expert on how JDG play the game. Or, watch Live Sandbox games and like be the
Mm.
expert at how teams take apart Live. Sorry, it sounds so harsh.
Yeah, yeah,
Be
yeah,
the
yeah. No,
expert
no,
at
I
beating
fully.
Live Sandbox. Like if you're playing against Live Sandbox tomorrow, like you better know 100% every single way that every single team has beaten them, ever, right? Like, and that is,
Yeah.
be an expert in that, and only when you like have an idea of like how do JDG think about the game, right? Um, then when you have a really good idea about mentality, then try to work out the mentality of the next team, and then compare and contrast, right? So the way that I improved the most was
Mm.
basically I would look at particular mid laners, or I would look at particular junglers, or I would look at particular teams, and I would be like, okay, this guy did something slightly different in, let's say, the Syndra versus LeBlanc matchup, right? That's really interesting. What's he thinking about? Why is he doing this? Right? What is the mentality that leads to him to do this? Why is he making this specific auto
Right.
attack that the other player isn't doing, therefore slightly pushing his wave? Is it to deny CS? Is it to shift like okay, well, okay, I've already started talking about it, right? But is he attacking this specific minion because he wants to change the angle at which the minion waves are hitting in the middle lane, right? So like, so he wants
Yeah.
the minion wave to slightly go around in a different angle, which affects how the minions auto, and and this kind of thing. So when I was studying something like this is what's coming into my mind, right? Like, this looks really odd. Why is he doing it, right? And that only comes from like specialization first, and then you diversify from your
Yeah.
from your specialization basis. And
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? In order to dumb it down, like for me, when I pick up a game, like doesn't matter any game, just for casual, you pick one character, you play the hell out of it, right? So you get good at a one character, so you have more, um, active memory, to understand the game and to then basically fan wide into other points of knowledge and other classes or characters. Like you want to specialize first and then you diversify, like, okay, what is out there as well that affect me, and you understand it in a different way.
yeah, I agree. And I think this was a mistake that I made early on in my career, right? Like, I was thinking, okay, what is the LCK style? Because LCK were winning everything, right?
Yeah, go like this,
And
very
yeah, and you
right.
watch
Yeah.
Samsung White and you watch Samsung Blue back in season 4, and they're not playing the same game. They're playing like completely different games. They're
Mm,
both very good at the games they're playing, but they're not the same game, right? Like, um,
right.
so so yeah, so that I think is a first mistake, like a big mistake I was making a lot. Um, the second thing I would say, in terms of other things, is just because somebody is picking the same champion or the same composition doesn't mean that they think the same about that composition, right? So let's talk about a little bit about a champion
Right.
like Renekton, controversial champion Renekton. Okay, so Renekton is
Sure.
currently not very good, right? But why did teams pick Renekton, right? Obviously, we know Renekton, good laning phase, similar thing, right? Strong laning phase, good at diving, falls off a bit late game against certain types of composition, right? So the some teams will play Renekton so that they can just permanent dive the enemy top laner. Some people will use Renekton as a
Yeah.
bridge, right? So you need to have priority somewhere. So you get priority so that you can get deep vision, so your jungler can farm safely by cross mapping the enemy jungler, so he doesn't get permanently invaded. Some people using
Right.
Renekton to snowball their bot lane, right? So back in the day, before TPs were changed, right? You would just you push a wave out when enemy will base first, because if your bot lane is losing, so they'll
Yeah.
push the wave in. Your bot lane can overstay to push another wave in, and then leave a ward in the middle of lane or somewhere that is hard to
Yeah.
find and sweep, and then they'll base, and then the enemy team will go back to pushing the wave out because they'll have priority because they have a strong bot lane, and you just
Right.
TP behind with your Renekton, and that's the only purpose of Renekton, right? Renekton is only there to
Yeah.
like bridge your bot lane's early game, and then he falls off a bit later game. Maybe you need a champion which is good on the flank, right? or maybe you want a champion that buys time, right? Like, so you have a Renekton in the top lane, you just want him to perma push all the time, because even if he goes 0-4, it literally doesn't matter, because you want to use the Renekton. You want to force people to come top so that your bot lane can also play really aggressive. So both your side lanes play aggressively. So either they get snowballed. So either the Renekton snowballs and then attacks the immobile AD carry on the other team, or they attack the Renekton and then you got percentage points in your bot lane matchup because you got to play more aggressively, knowing that the jungler has to come top to deal with the Renekton, so you could take more risks, which means that you are now able to play more aggressively, right? And this is just certain examples. I mean, and obviously every decision is a combination of the two. But if you think, every time you see a Renekton, you're thinking, okay, this Renekton is only for diving top, or this Renekton is only for playing for jungle priority, or this,
Exactly.
then you miss out on things. But the most interesting thing is not all of that. The most interesting thing is you see a coach who's drafting Renekton. Is there a pattern with how his teams play the Renekton? Because then that will tell you about the coach, right? And then if you see that the Renekton is always like a bridge, then okay, so this coach is using top lane as a bridge for his bot lane. Okay, so then how? So if we think about that in more process, does he do this with other champions? Right? Like, is he doing this with Sion, for instance? Right? Like, to use Sion strong early wave push, like not the best compared to like an Ornn or something later game. So is he doing this with other way? Is he using this as bridges bot lane? Okay, so what are some strategies I can learn from this? Because this is a coach that's clearly thinking in this way. Is he using the Renekton to always dive top? Okay, then how are they contesting mid jungle priority? Are they using their support roams on a particular timer? Renekton will always have wave control. So how are they, like, if Renekton is always getting wave control in this matchup, how are they timing their hits on the tower, their dive timers with support roams, right? Or are they using him as a bait or something like this, right? And that's some, like, I can talk about 100 different questions, that go through your mind.
Yeah, but basically what you're saying, or at least I try to summarize it, is like, okay, it's like not only the initial consequence of a pick, but the secondary consequence, the tertiary consequence that have such just like so many options, just like a talent tree, right? It looks the same, but it is very different in each pick and how it can be used and amplified. And by studying like several games of like your analysis of your enemy, you basically reveal the strategy or the big brain mind behind the play or whatever. And because what we said as well, if you have these data points, you can read between the lines. So you have, instead of 10 options how they can play it, or it's just Renekton, it's probably they do A or they do B, so you can respond to that. So
exactly, and I think that just one final point on this. This all comes, like, none of this works unless you specialize on the team first, right? So if all you're trying to do is learn Renekton, then you're missing a ton of the context, right? And the context is how the team is using this champion. But what actually matters, first of all, is learning the team and learning the philosophy and learning how the coach thinks or how the players think on the team and learning how they work. And that's the key point in your own self-improvement. And that's something that I missed out at the start, because when I was learning new champions, I would just be like, okay, I'm going to grind 50 Syndra games, right? But in a modern context, well, Syndra's not in the meta, like LeBlanc, okay? 50 LeBlanc games. And I just go and watch 50 LeBlanc games. But actually what matters, what I've realized now is, actually, I don't want 50 LeBlanc games. I want like 5 games or 10 games of Rookie on LeBlanc. I want 5 games or 10 games of Showmaker on LeBlanc and all of this. And then I want to come up with my own ideas, but then I want to go to my mid laner and I want to go and say, okay, here's the difference between how these guys play the matchup. Let's have a conversation. And it's not me telling you what is the right thing, although I'm willing to tell you what's the right thing if that's what you want, right? You because it's more efficient in time. But let's have a conversation about, this is how Showmaker is playing it. This is how Yagao is playing it, right? Like, let's have a talk and let's see what we think is good and what we think is bad, right? And for me, that feeds into the next point, which is that not all players want to learn the same way. Not all players learn the same way. But as a coach, you should adapt to the players you're working with, but also your primary responsibility 100%. As a coach is to teach a player how to reason things through themselves and not just spoon feed them the information. And so some spoon feeding is needed because it's efficient, but it's the mistake I think I made a lot in my early career as a head coach is I would try to spoon feed information and all that gave you was quick fixes. Whereas actually, you want to like
Yep.
it's cheesy. I've got a thing. I can't say expand your mind. That's too cheesy. Like teach them to help them build their processes. Help them build their processes so that they can do it themselves. And you don't like in the future. You can just come in and say, okay, here's some VODs. Just go and watch the VODs, and here are my notes from the VODs.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I use like a similar analogy. I call it like wiping the boogers out of their noses, right? They have a booger, and if you as a mom or dad always get your napkin and you take it away, they don't learn or about like certain consequences or why it should be like and some kids or if as a metaphor they develop a certain type of that everything gets done for them, right? You take away the learning opportunity. It's like telling a kid to not play with fire, but we all know, like in a logical mind, the only way to teach them to not play with fire is to let them get burned, right? To have that first-hand experience. And the way I see it, like in a term, is what I call transferring control. Right, you present it, but you give the agency the control of what the player wants to learn and what he actually takes away, because learning is a very individual process, right? And you present it in that way, so you have that discussion, exactly what you're saying. So yeah, that I think, yeah, that totally makes sense.
I mean, I think also, like, this is something that I've always done since I was involved as a coach, but personality testing. Like when I'm joining a new team,
Oh, let's go. We're look behind me. Well, I'm all
yeah.
about it. So let's start, Peter.
But personality testing, obviously, incredibly important. And I'll be honest, when I first started, in this industry, I would just use something really basic like Myers Briggs, right? Like Myers Briggs is not good, right? Like to be clear,
Yeah,
but
MBTI. Yeah,
it was better than nothing. And then obviously over the years, I've gained more experience in this sector about what things to look out for in those kind of tests and instructional things. But the understanding that people are different, right? People learn in different
yep,
ways, and your job as a coach is to either to be able to adapt your own coaching style to a particular player or to find somebody else who can. And I think this is a thing as well. Like, so this wasn't a problem with me personally, but I've seen it be a problem with other coaches when I've been sitting in on their scrims. Like, coaches think that they can adapt to every single player in every single way. And I've had players on teams, like
mm,
really good players, who I just cannot I just cannot coach them, right? Like it's just, and it's
yep,
not because I hate them, like they're perfectly good people. It's just that my skill set is not well adapted to dealing with them. So I'll find somebody else on my coaching staff who is, or if we don't have anybody, like I'll make it really clear that it's important we that we do find somebody. And if there's no budget, then
yeah,
we'll find a way to adapt, right? And often that will be simply me coming to the player and saying, you know, what, how can I help you, right? Like, what do you want from me? Which is
right,
not ideal, right? Because often as a coach, you want to have the ideas for them, because the whole point is you're trying to expand you're trying to give them different thoughts and different ideas. So sometimes if you
right.
just ask a player all the time, what do you want, what do you want, what do you want, you know, they're not expanding their mind. They're just like, you know,
Yeah, it's like I don't
yeah,
know.
but it's also something like, so there may be a completely different way of approaching a problem which they haven't thought about, right? So this is kind of like your fate, which you can provide as a coach, but it's never going to,
Yeah,
if you ask a player, how can I help you, they're never going to say something which they've never even thought about, right? Like obviously, because
yeah,
um but that's like a stopgap measure. But in a perfect world, you recognize people are different. You know what your skill set is as a coach. You know what you're good at. You know what you're weak at, and maybe there's a particular personality type which I can coach at an academy level, but I can't coach at an LCS level or like an LEC level. Like
yeah. To spoil a little bit, right? For people listening, what would be like someone you can really work with? Like what aligns with your personality, and what is like a difficult type of sort of player, right? Just talking general, not
okay,
naming
so
names. Well,
I tend to work best with players who have very strong personalities, who are willing to, like who aren't willing to just take what I say for granted. So I really like players who will challenge
right,
me, who will basically say, you're wrong on this, or like you're garbage or something. Like I literally couldn't care less if one of my players tells me that I'm complete garbage. I mean, nobody has told me, but maybe they're too nice. Maybe they secretly think it. But, I don't care if like I'm willing to have a fight, right? And I really like
Yeah.
people who are willing to fight with me about certain things and be confrontational, because then we can have interesting discussions. Because my style is never to go and tell a player, this is what you must do, this thing, or else I'm going to tell you off, right? My style has always been, here are
Right.
2 options, or like here are 3 or 4 options. I think this is best. You think this is best. Let's have a discussion about which of these things, and maybe option A or option B isn't the best. Maybe it's option C, and we compromise and we come to option C, right?
Exactly.
But those players, I really, really enjoy coaching, and I really like to coach. It's often very
Mm.
difficult though in that type of player. Like if it's a rookie, it's very, very easy, right? Because then we build a rapport from early on, and I like a lot of coaching rookies is about limit testing, and there's some ground where they will be better than you at, like somebody like Jojo. Like Jojo's understanding of laning phase was better than mine in like 5 months. Like, I mean, there was a point where I was just like, okay, I'm very close to
Yeah.
reaching the limit to what I can coach you in this area. Like, here's some VODs. Let's continue to have a discussion. I'll continue to feed you information about how other people play the laning phase. But like, you're just understanding like the kind of stuff that you're breaking down and noticing. I just cannot notice. I'm like, work like, let's talk about how we can work. But here's how I can contribute. I can help you with your mid game. I can help you with your team fighting and that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
for sure.
But so those kind of players that I really, really like. The players that I really struggle to coach are the players that just agree with everything you say. I really struggle. I
Mm.
really struggle with those guys, because I'm always like second guessing, especially when I'm not there in person because of COVID things. When there is somebody who just like, oh yeah, okay, sure, and then they go and make the mistake in the next game, I'm like, did they actually agree? And do they really think
Yeah.
this? And like, it's it's sometimes you can get across with there, but there always has to be an amount of distance between you and a player as a head coach, right? Like your other coaches can all be friends with
Sure.
players, right? But you have to be in a neutral enough position, and that means that in those positions, like the best thing you can do is like, from my experience with a player like that, is take them for a drink and say, look, what's up? Like we've gone over this kind of thing multiple times, and like I struggle in a head coach role or head of coaching staff role to build that kind of rapport. Because you have to
Mm.
always be neutral, right? You have to see the larger thing, and I think this is something which I've really, really, really struggled with over the course of my career. So I tend to work best alongside an assistant coach like Mac, or somebody like Rigby, or back in the day Duke, because those guys will have very strong personalities, and they're willing to either be the bad guy, in the situations where maybe it's hard for me to be the bad guy, and then or they're willing to take somebody out for food. And I'm not going to say which of these were which,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, 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 yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing is always hard, and that's something I miss, right? Because to be honest, what do I think my best role is? Like in a perfect world where everyone is paid equal, and like everyone is equally qualified and everyone is equally skilled, what do I
Right.
think is my best role? I think my best role is assistant coach. I think I'm like literally the best assistant coach you can possibly imagine, right? Like, and I'm really cocky. I'm really cocky in this area, right? But like, if I was an assistant coach, I will literally grind the game 18 hours a day. I will like, go really specific. I'm good specialist knowledge, good history. I've worked with a lot of head coaches. I've been in the head coach role, so I know what can make a head coach's life really easy, right? I know how to make your life easy.
Right.
I was working during Worlds because I wasn't with EG. I wasn't with EG at the Worlds because there's limited party size, so they didn't bring me. So I was a remote analyst, right? And that's how I started my career.
Mm.
But obviously now I'm a better analyst because I've been a head coach, so I know exactly all the kind of things. I'm very efficient in being an analyst
Exactly.
because I know what a head coach wants, and I know not to waste your time on things which don't mean any, which aren't important, right? Because
Yeah.
so but the problem is that there's a difference in experience and a difference in authority and a difference in I don't know, like a difference in respect isn't the word I'm looking for. Like it would be very hard for most Western coaches to treat me in an appropriate way as an assistant coach without there being some insecurity is not the word I'm looking for. Without there being some kind of difficulty in the relationship, right? Because always when you're in a situation where where somebody who is the assistant coach is more experienced, that naturally creates some kind of attention. And with somebody like Mac, it was very easy, right? But I don't think I could be a good assistant coach for everybody.
Right.
But why Mac? Because Mac is somebody I work with, right from the start of his career. We have a good personal relationship, and it was very easy for Mac to say to me, "I need this from you, right? Like, go and do it." And then he knows that I will go and do it, and he trusts me to. He doesn't need to check up on me.
Exactly.
But it wouldn't be easy for. I'm just trying to think like. Okay, because we mentioned Crusher before, it would be hard for, like, I don't know what Crusher's like as a person, right? But somebody who came up from an ERL into like a position like this to have me as an assistant coach, I think it would be really difficult. And I hope that esports isn't always like this because there's a lot of data that proves that having somebody in a more experienced position is useful. Like you look at airlines, right? Like the captain is often the younger of the two people in the cockpit because they had a lot of issues with crashes in the past, where the more senior person was the captain and the it's not vice captain and the pilot.
Yeah, I don't know, like the
Co-pilot,
co-pilot,
right?
right?
And the
Co-pilot? Yeah,
co-pilot was the more
co-pilot.
junior person, and the more junior person had objections, but didn't feel comfortable like challenging the authority of the captain. And normally in like lots of major airlines like KLM or like other kind of things, the more senior person is the co-pilot, and or the more experienced person is the co-pilot, and the more junior person is the pilot. In order
Interesting. Didn't know
to have
that.
that kind of check, right? And since we're talking about my experience, right? If you want to know why head of coaching staff is a role, right? What
Yeah, no, for sure, because that was basically a follow-up question, because head of coaching staff seems like a sort of supportive role, but with a different scope of
exactly?
responsibility, right? It's more wide, while it'll be the support of everyone. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. I think it's very interesting how you got to that role, and how it fit,
I'll
and
be honest.
all the
There
learnings.
was how much can I say about this? It was rumored that Movie Star Riders would be a franchise team back in 2019. Okay,
Yeah.
um, it was rumored. Uh, Movie Star Riders had somebody on their coaching staff called Dalo. Okay,
Yeah.
Dalo, who
Daylor.
was obviously on
Yeah.
Fnatic, right? People who know who was on Fnatic. I don't know what he's doing now with his life, right? But at the time he was their GM or somebody senior within him, like, within the team.
Mm.
And he, when I, the rumor was Splice were not going to make franchising, and so I think Movie Star Riders were like looking at people to bring in as a coach, and Daylor had basically one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had with a coach, right? Where he was like, "Build your ideal coaching staff," and then I told him about a lot of things which are a bit private, and then we had a talk back, and he there were a lot of things I learned from that conversation. Uh,
Mm.
Part of it is stuff which is obvious, like before 2019, I never interacted with anyone on social media, right? Like for instance, and he highlighted why that he thought that was important, because you're essentially protecting your players in a way by having a public profile, but also he talked
Yeah.
about we talked about skill sets, authority, and experience within a team, and how to build like an appropriate coaching structure. Because I remember one thing that he told me was, okay, so this is the structure for you, your ideal structure, right? But wouldn't this skill set that you're describing in your assistant coach, wouldn't this be normally better in a head coach, right? Because we were talking about ideal coaching structure. And I said, yeah, well, normally it would
Mm.
be, but the problem is that you have this guy in a head coach role, but who is experienced enough in a head coach role to have this skill set that is going to be comfortable telling me, because we're talking about my ideal coaching structure, that I need to go and do this other kind of thing, right? And this is
Mm.
where, like, this is kind of a little bit about what. So obviously, like what does a head of coaching staff do? Essentially, it's a supportive role for everyone in the org, but it gives you like oversight of everything, right? So should we continue? So system, okay, it's a system.
Yeah, we were about to talk about the system.
Okay.
Exactly.
So it's a system, right? And like, what would I say that my best skill sets are as a coach? I'm good at recognizing problems, right? I'm good at problem solving, right? But what would you say, like, you could argue is my biggest weakness as a person? Maybe I don't have the best leadership stuff, right? And this is because my style of leadership is to be extremely supportive, and to recognize, okay, here is the issue that's going on. Here's a solution, but it's not necessarily to go and say, this, like, so the biggest criticism I've had of me as like in a head coach role is that I don't defend my position to the death sometimes. Like, I'm always willing to see things from the other person's point of view. And sometimes when you're just right, and this is feedback I got from a player from EG, right? Sometimes when you're right, you just need to say, you're right, right? Just like say, try it this way. And, maybe I would say that my biggest weakness as a coach is sometimes, too many times, I've allowed us to waste time or be inefficient when something was obviously correct by trying to see from another point of view, right? Because this is my natural tendency as a human being, right? My natural tendency from a human being.
Agreeableness.
Yeah, but also to try to understand other people's perspective, because we talk about my academic
Brazil,
hobbies.
continents,
Exactly,
all
right?
sides.
It's always to try to understand and to try to, okay, this person is saying this, but sometimes you just need to be willing to say, like, stop it, just do it, just try it this way, and then we'll go and have a long discussion about it afterwards. And this, if you're talking about my own personal strengths and weaknesses, this is something that I've learned over many years. So I'll compensate that with other ways of coaching, like specific styles of coaching, which I use myself, or with different people in my staff and things like this, right? So that is, so what is a head of coaching staff role? A head of coaching staff role is essentially what people in Korea call a head coach, right? And then the person on stage they call a strategic coach, but in the West we call the person on stage the head coach. So so the head of coaching staff is like, yeah, okay, but what do we mean? We mean head coach in Korea. When we say head coach, what do we mean? We mean strategic coach in Korea, but we'll just use the Western terms, right? So what's the head of coaching staff? Head of coaching staff is there to provide mentorship, problem-solving solution, and support for a head coach, right? In the LCS team, but it's also to figure other things out in the project, scouting, long-term planning, resource allocation across multiple teams, okay? And is this role pretty useless in an org that only has one team? Kind of is, right? Like, it's only useful if you have an academy team. It's only useful if you have long-term development processes, right? Like,
so 2 years basically.
Yeah, so multiple years, or something like, you want to develop your academy coaches, but you also want somebody to fill in you want somebody to fill in responsibility within the main team, right? So it's a primarily main team role, but with a lot of other responsibilities, which, having all of those cleared, allows the head coach to do their job, and also it's providing additional support to the head coach, right? Because it's also, because it's a position of authority, it allows you to break up arguments, for instance, right? Which is important, because you can be an arbiter, whereas if you have somebody who's in an assistant coach role breaking up arguments between a head coach and a player, that person doesn't have the same level of authority, right? So you look at a team that has somebody filling a similar role, like Jack on Cloud9, right? Jack is somebody who fills what would be called a head coaching role in other regions, but he's not really a head coach because he doesn't know much about League of, well, he knows some, but he's not like a specialist. But if there's an argument in Cloud9, Jack is the one who's arbitrating, and he's always sitting in on all of the scrims, and he's always watching, even though he's not leading the review or something like this, right?
Exactly.
So that's something that I've done on many teams. Maybe it's something that teams think is only required for a certain amount of years at the start of a project before you hand it over to somebody else full time, which is maybe why I'm staying on teams for short periods of time. but essentially I think that all orgs can benefit from somebody like that. And what their title is not important, right? But it's somebody who's fulfilling that kind of an arbitration role, and it can be a GM, it can be a team owner in the case of Cloud9. It can be, you can call him a head coach, you can call him a team leader, which is what the rough translation of what they call that role in China. You can have like, it can be anything, right? But it's but having somebody there to be the final point of discussion is important, right?
Do you think like performance coaches could fill in that role, or is that like a different thing because they can lead discussions, right? They sometimes bringing different skill sets, not only mental things, but would you feel like that is the same thing, or is it like different?
So two things. Number one, well, sure. First thing, yes, it's possible. Right? But number two, does the performance coach have the understanding and the authority to be able to do that? Right? Because part of the reason why head coaches are in this role is because you don't just hire a random person as a head coach. You hire like somebody who's worked their way up through the system and who's basically providing experience, or you have somebody who is who maybe often in Korea they do this, like an ex-StarCraft coach, or like a some other kind of,
he earned his stripes basically.
Yeah, he earned his stripes, so you automatically have respect, but also they have an understanding of the esports environment.
Exactly.
Right? Like and that's the problem with performance coaches.
Yeah, they usually come from a total different
So I haven't met a performance coach who could fulfill the role, who was skilled enough to fulfill the role yet. But I can believe that a performance coach would be very good at that role, is what I would say. But you would have to, like, if you're a performance coach and you're trying to fill that kind of a role, you would have to realize that your biggest weakness is game knowledge, right? So you would have to like find an org who is willing to dedicate a coach to you to like improve your game knowledge and have you trained as if you're a player, right? To fill that gap, right? Is what I would say. I think it would take away a lot from the good work that performance coaches I've worked with in the past have done, but I could definitely see somebody doing that. And I think somebody with those skills would be very well equipped to fill that role. But the problem is, if the head coach comes to you with a problem that you don't have and you try to solve it, how you would solve it, because most performance coach training is related to conventional sports, right? Because that's just how it is, right? That's where the experience is, that's where the data points are in the past. Then something which may work in a conventional sports context might not work in an esports context. And there's lots of specific things which are esports related, which like, to give an example, in esports there's an expectation that you're open to the public, right? Nobody cares that Neymar doesn't actually run his account. Right? Does he run his account? Or Messi, or
probably not.
His Twitter account, right? But there is an expectation in esports, and one of the reasons why esports is so appealing to fans, right, is because there's that personal touch.
It's very, very pure.
Very pure, although until they start sending death threats, but it's but basically that is why esports was popular at the start, in my opinion, right? It's because these were like heroes that you could interact with, that you could watch on stream, that at the end of the game, like, one thing which which didn't happen in COVID, but I think is incredibly important, is that in LEC and LCS, if you were a fan and you came to visit the game, after the games are over, there's like a section where you can literally go and take a photo with all the players. You can shake their hands. You can tell them like how great they are. Very rarely how shit they are, but sometimes how shit they are. But you have that personal interaction, and there's no chance. Can you imagine LeBron James like going and shaking LA Lakers fans?
Yeah, I don't have time for this.
You just don't have time for this. And I think that's a bit what we lost in the pandemic, and I think that's making it a bit less personal, and that's one of my things that I don't like as much about the franchising era. You don't see you see like a version of the players and of the teams that is very sanitized, right? It's sanitized, exactly. And that means you lose a bit of the connection that you had before. But sorry, this was a detail. Why are we talking about sanitization? Conventional sports. So without understanding that clash, and that's just one thing, right? I can think of 20 other topics, but we'll talk for another hour if we do.
Yeah.
Then I think without that background understanding, it makes it very hard to give the best advice you can. And I think that's one of the reasons why, back in 2014, 2015, when a lot of the conventional sports coaches were brought in, there was a lot of, from the players I've spoken to, a lot of those guys came in and said, I'm going to fix esports. And
Yeah.
we're just going to do things my way, without
Nope.
taking the time to understand what they were dealing with, and without the humility to understand, okay, I'm weak in this area. I need to be better if I want to do my job. So please teach me, right?
Yeah.
And this is, for me, from my perspective, obviously, because I come from a similar background, right? Like, it's that humility is the thing which has served me the most well over my career, because you have to understand you're going to make mistakes, you're going to have misunderstandings, you're just going to be wrong, and you have to just know when you're wrong. And maybe
Yeah.
that's the flip side, because I said that was my weakness, right? Like, as a coach, because I said that, I sometimes don't hold my point enough. But the flip side of this is when you see things from the other perspective, is you have a better idea of when you're wrong, and a better idea of when to initiate discussion. Okay, what is my learning process? What do I need to learn from this?
Yeah.
But yeah, so performance coach, yes, can be very good, but needs to come in with not
Yeah,
thinking they're going to fix everything immediately.
needs quite some work usually in order to fulfill that. I can imagine that into the future, as more younger esports performance coaches are, following the ranks through, through the years, that there will be a place for that maybe in 5 to 10 years, where we will see like the first ones that really are integrated. Some performance coaches are already are already around us, for a couple of
Yeah,
years, and
I
they
agree.
doing some good work. So I'm looking forward to see that. So Peter, right? We have let's say a couple of minutes left, and I would like to really to dive into one specific topic, right? We talked about like the systemic issues about like NA, coach development, and everything. What should we need to do? How can we fix it? And what would that look like? Like we've talked about it, like in between, we can imagine that, but maybe to get a little bit more in detail, a little bit concrete, as like a final point of like, okay, this is what we can share with, or from your experience, what is needed, right? Because let's assume 10,000 people would watch this YouTube video, listen to this podcast, and 50% of those are coaches. They are listening and hanging, at your lips to hear what is needed, how they can improve, right?
Mm-hmm.
What and how?
In North America or in general? Because my advice to North Americans.
You can combine them, right? I think, of course, there are some differences, but I think the pain point, when let's talk about NA, because when you talk about NA, because it's a little bit more rough. Uh, the coaches that are listening, I think they can understand of if some directions they are taking right now that they are doing already, roughly in a okay way or in a good way, and some things they can improve. So let's talk about the rough diamond that's called NA.
Okay, so the sad thing is that right now, if I was a new coach coming up in NA, my advice to a coach like that is don't stay in NA, right? Like,
All
because
right.
the incentive structures you have for teams right now in NA are not in your favor for your development, right? For a lot of reasons that we've talked before, those incentive structures are changing over time, right? Reduced budgets of teams, changes to the proving ground format, changes to the champions queue format.
Of course.
Like, those things are changing, but they're changing slowly, and they're going to benefit people in 5 years, maybe 2 years, maybe, because they've already, the change in the proving ground format is 2 years old, right? So that's a change which will have an impact for players in 2 to 3 years, but for coaches, like, the benefits from the changes to the EU Masters format was felt in 2 years for players, because I say 2 years because 2 years is when Larson, Humanoid, Nemesis, Abadage all came up, right, together, and that was like the bounty of the change in the EU Masters format, right? But for coaches, we're only seeing the really big benefit for coaches now coming up, right? Coaches who've had 5 years to prove themselves within the new EU Masters format, and now are coming in and filling a lot of the roles at the LEC level.
Right.
Those kind of changes in North America, like the system, if you are a North American coach right now, is stacked against you, and it's because, firstly, the skills, it's very hard to improve. orgs don't have improvement processes for you, right? From what I've heard, maybe things are changing this year, but from the orgs that I've worked with, like EG, maybe C9, but I think EG are basically the only org that like had an actual program for coach improvement, right? That was
How did that look like? Yeah, coach
you know,
improvement program.
things like workshops, things like seminars, things like weekly progress reports. Like I had to do bi-weekly reports on. Am I leaking stuff that I shouldn't be leaking? Resources allocated into coach improvement, right?
Right. Okay.
And mentorship, right? Time with LCS coaches. If you're in academy and amateur, you have an expected amount of time that you have to spend with LCS coaches every 2 weeks, right? To gain advice and to get feedback, right? Openness
Mm.
of lines, right? So if head of coaching staff, academy coach wants help, the academy coach gets help, right? Some normally through me, but through somebody else, right? Um, access to scrims. So a lot of LCS teams block their academy teams and their amateur teams from watching LCS scrims. Which fine, maybe you're worried about players leaking, but if you're a coach and you can't watch the LCS reviews, that's slightly bad for your own development, right? Because you're missing out on resources. So this is how orgs can do things. I'm sure other orgs like send their coaches on seminars and things.
Do you think it's a responsibility for the orgs alone, or is it a responsibility for the coaches in itself to find ways to develop as well, right? To I don't know, like I've met coaches that are from the US that were coaching AU teams like tier 3, tier 2,
Yeah.
like in the Benelux region, just to get that experience and all of those things. Like, would you say like if you don't have it, go search for it, like.
So not everyone has the financial resources to be able to do it, is what I would say. So this is kind of why I think that having resources within teams, I think, is important in North America system if you want to maximize your, like, I think, it's crazy to have undertrained coaches or like coaches with no self-improvement mechanism when your roster is like, I don't think any roster in LCS is less than 800k, right? But let's say some rosters are multi-million, right? And you're not investing in the coaches who are running those rosters. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's actually just crazy.
It's mind-blowing. It's
Yeah,
mind-blowing.
and from what I've heard, European coaches, head coaches, get paid more than NA head coaches. Not as an average, because it's skewed, but as a general rule. Which is interesting, right? Because players in NA before this year were earning 2 to 3 times as much, if not more, than EU players, right? But it works the other way in North America, which is also interesting, in a sense. Okay, so system is stacked against you. Where is the best place you can go and improve? It's Europe, obviously. Like Europe, the ERL system is the single best system in the entire world, including Korea, including China, including like Southeast Asia. Then you can improve as a coach. There is just like, there are so many jobs available at so many different levels. You're not going to earn millions, right? But you're going to have.
You have your good chances.
Yeah, you have good chances and you have opportunities for self-improvement. And that's the key point, right? Like, you don't want to be working on your, okay, I mean, you should always be working on self-improvement, right? But you don't want to be making critical self-improvement learning mistakes in the middle of game 5 of the drafted on stage, game 5 of playoffs when you're
think again.
Right? Which, I've been through that myself, right? Like, game 2018, G2 lost 3-2 in the gauntlet. I learned a lot of valuable lessons from losing 3-2 to G2 in the gauntlet. Like, don't give Heimerdinger to Hjanen. 2 games in a row. But anyway, the point is that's ideally when you're not learning those, like, you need to have those processes in place before. And where is the best place you can do it? It's in Europe. And this would be the same advice I would give to any Asian coaches who can speak English. Like, I would say, come to Europe and learn and see what you can contribute there. Right? And I think that they're trying to introduce more mechanisms in East Asia. Like, they have like an East Asia Academy Championship now between like Rising Stars. It's called Rising Stars. That's what it's called.
Okay, cool.
Where it gives you cross-pollination between regions, which is a good thing. So yeah. Second, so issue number 1, issue number 2. Duplicating is good, but try to understand the thought process which comes into duplication. So
Right.
this is something I'm going to say. I'm just going to use an example for this. So LS is somebody who is a controversial coach in North America, but is somebody who has very strong ideas, right?
Yep.
And
For
when I've
sure.
interviewed people, I've literally had people who will come back and tell me literally something that Ellis has said on his stream, and then just expect that it's a given, right?
Yep.
And they're going to say this kind of thing, and then you question them on the specifics of why they come to that idea, and they cannot answer any question, right?
Yep.
And that is, for me, like that's a massive black mark against you. And it's not because it's LS, right? Like it's because it's anybody, right? Like if you come back and say my ideas back to me, and then I've had coaches who've literally said my ideas back to me because they say, okay, I really like to work under you because I've learned these kind of things from you and from studying your thing. So okay, you've learned these things. So tell me about the thought process behind this, because you're telling me that you like these
Yeah.
ideas, and I've got to explain why I have these ideas,
Yeah.
right? So what do you think about this argument? And then they're like,
Yeah. It sounds nice.
it's the same thing. But actually, the funny thing is, so I mentioned this LS thing because there was a coach on EG Academy who's not on EG Academy anymore, who's called ZZ Legendary, who I actually respect a lot as a coach. I think he was a rookie head coach, so it took him time to learn. In spring, I don't think he was a good academy head coach, but in summer, I think he was actually beginning to become quite a good academy head coach. He's released from EG. I'm not entirely sure why, but this
Okay.
guy is a huge LS fan. He like loves LS, and he has ideas. And then so my initial thought process when I was interviewing him was, oh no, it's another one of these guys, right? And then I interviewed him, and he was precise. He was precise on all of the things. He was like, I really like these ideas, but I think they can be tweaked in this area, or this is an idea which I think we should accept at face value, but here's another one which needs these ideas, and he clearly needs these modifications. But I think the core idea is good, but the implementation suggested on in this idea wasn't as good as it could have been, right? And he thought about the ideas, right? It wasn't the final destination to have the idea. It was, this is a really good idea, and I think this is a really good idea, and the implementation is great. Okay, great. What about the second idea? Okay, this is an idea where the idea is good, the implementation can be better. This is an idea where the idea is like, I get what he's coming from, but like I think you can modify it in this way, and then it will work in this. And it was just taking somebody's idea, and it was incorporating your own flair, and your own touch, and your own
He was also speaking your language, right?
yeah, exactly.
He took an idea,
Yeah,
right? I think that's why you mentioned it, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. He mentioned it, but he took like the academic approach, like okay, I like this idea, but why? What are they against? What are the the force, right? And look at it from different angles, and then like, okay, here are maybe some new baby solutions, right? That come from it.
And from my experience, as somebody like I've interviewed so many coaches over the year, like I've interviewed thousands, yeah, probably thousands actually at this point, of
Mm,
coaches over the years, right? Those guys, the people that think like that, are the guys you have to watch out for. Those are the guys that like really, really like have the potential to be very, very good coaches.
mm.
And
So develop this
yeah, develop this. That's my advice. Develop that. Develop if you can develop that skill set, and that
perspectives.
yeah. But how do you do it? You normally do it by working with a team where you have opportunities to make mistakes, right? Because you're going to make mistakes in this
You
kind of
have to go out and make
have to go out.
risky plays and
Exactly.
experiment.
Exactly. And if it's the same as for players, right? We say to players, you need to limit test
Mm.
sometimes in scrims to push your limits. Same as a coach, right? But the North American system, if you're a coach, punishes you like to the ends of the earth for limit testing as a coach, right? Like you could like end your career for limit testing.
You better be prepared.
Yeah. So don't go straight in and do it. Like go to even I don't know. So I'm just saying this, right? But like, go to like an LLA academy team, or like go to a Brazilian academy team, or go to Benelux, or go to Portugal. Right? You don't have to even go to the top regions for these. If you want to make yourself better as an esports coach, do things in this way. If you're in North America, because you try to do this in academy and LCS, and you will end your career, right? Like
Yeah.
unless your org backs you, which they're not going to back you for the reasons we've said before. So that's my advice in North America. My advice in Europe, if you're a European coach, is great. You've got the best system. The dice are in your favor.
Yeah.
Go out and like get advantages.
Yeah. It's so like for me, my heart just like made a little bit of a skip, right? In a happy skip. In terms of like what you said, like if you want to develop as a coach, I think I recently talked to I, I, well, it was like a panel with other coaches and stuff. And, there's so much pressure on the highest echelons, like in LEC, LCS, and types of thing, where it's really hard to experiment with your coaching skills, like to really push the boundaries or to try something, a whole new system, or, to implement and to be the nutty, crazy professor to do all those things and plans and to put everything in place and make your own system to try and, to potentially fail or to innovate. And the thing where I said, and basically what you said as well, for everyone to learn, if you really want to push the envelope and to really express and understand who you are as a coach, go to the lower regions, lower teams, just humble yourself and be there for your development with the best intentions, and to really push the envelopes, like to really push your boundaries, like try something different and be okay with like a sixth or fifth place or seventh place, right? And just be transparent with what you want to do. And you will find teams, especially from my experience in Europe, where they are open for such projects. So if you really want to push the envelope and really make the everything that you have talked about, I think that is a really good playground.
Be respectful, though, is what I would say to this, right? Like, don't just go and say, I'm going to use your org for your own, for my personal development, right?
You
Be
have
like,
to have a plan, right? You have to good
yeah,
story, everything, right?
yeah,
Yeah, good addition to that, right? You have to have a plan. You have to articulate it, why you want to do this, and it has to be like inspiring, motivating, and it has to be a rainbow at the end of the tunnel. But that's how you can do it, I think.
I agree. And I think if you're at the top level, right, like if you're at the LCS level, like volunteering, right, in the off season. So I didn't do it this off season because like I haven't had a vacation for 4.5 years. This is my first vacation for 4.5 years since I've been working full time in esports. Like it's
Yeah.
only the second one that I've ever had. The Every off season, I used to volunteer myself to ERL teams or in NA collegiate teams. So actually, even though I say I'm taking vacation, I'm actually helping like a low level collegiate team, not like Maryville or something, right? Like a low level collegiate team, and just watching their scrims, right?
Yeah.
And being an additional coach, like our lead scrims may be well, I haven't done it yet because I just came back from vacation, but next week I'm
Right.
going to lead scrims for them for one day, right? And and this is with consent from their current head coach, and
Of course.
I'm acting as his assistant coach and things like this, and just providing like feedback and providing, making sure my coaching skills are up to scratch, right? In a different environment, because we build bubbles over the course of a season, right? So you just need to check yourself and test yourself in a new environment out of those bubbles, and don't be too proud to do it, because I think a lot of coaches, if you're an
Wow.
LCS, there's a lot of pride there, right? And that don't think people are beneath you, right?
Ego, huge.
Ego is the enemy.
Yeah. And
uh,
and humility is the cure.
yeah, and
I
again,
believe so.
I mean, I firmly believe that, like to the core of my heart. But
Yeah.
like, it sounds like some, thing you see on a quote on the Facebook wall, But like these things, they're popular for a reason, right? And I agree. And actually, just to go back to your first initial question that you asked me, which was, why did I think my time in NA was a failure, right? Because
Yeah,
we
the
proved it well.
great one. Go ahead.
They brought up young players. They brought up, they proved that you could be an NA mid laner, or like Danny at MSI still makes me sad because of the situation around it, because of the ping situation. He plays on 4,200 DP. Like it for something like that, like ping makes a difference. But anyway, like I don't want to drag onto this because I have a core point, right? But my core point is like that freedom of experimentation, right? Like for me, on every team I've been on, that experimentation has been what has defined the team itself, right? And
Right.
as a head of coaching staff, like normally this is what I would do for my head coach, right? I would encourage them to experiment. I would give them an environment for experimentation. I set appropriate limits for what we're going to try. Like the one thing that I mentioned, like because I know Mac won't care about it too much, is when Mac was head coaching in 2020, we only scrim 3 days a week. Right? Like normally there's 4 scrim days a week. We literally on the Monday we just didn't scrim. Right? We did like
Yeah.
WOD review. We did one-to-one coaching. We did like we got the players sometimes to go and watch games of teams we were playing that weekend, and they would do the scouting report. You know, we give obviously we have our scouting report done,
Yes,
right?
so
But
much.
we go and say, here's 2 to 3 games from this team, split up into 2 groups, right? 2 of you in one group,
I
3 of
love it.
you in present your findings to the rest of your team in an hour, right? And this is just something we did on a Monday, and this is something Mac really pushed for, right? Like he was like, you know, I think we're scrimming too much. I think we can gain more about this. And
Yeah.
what did I do? Right, the first thing I did is, you know, because I come from Asian background, I'm like, I'm not sure this is correct, but
Yeah.
like let's try it. Let's try it for a month. You know, this is what we need to see. This kind of progress we need to see. You know, let's try it. You know, I'm really skeptical, to be clear, back. I'm really skeptical, and it was fantastic for that team, right? Like the
Yeah.
only reason, so obviously everyone only remembers how that season ended for the 2020 Mad Lions, but that team was for many weeks like on global power rankings was like a top 5 team, top 10 team in the world, because they were just smashing LEC. And why were they smashing LEC? Because
Mm.
it was a different approach to coaching that their head coach had, that I was able to support and reinforce and find methods to help him get his idea there and protect it, right? Because obviously, you know, I've got to be careful about this. People are naturally skeptical when you say you want to scrim less. People, you know, up the chain, and you know, this is something
There, I would like to add, it's not scrimming less, it's practicing in a different way.
practicing in a different way. And you know, I'm not saying we never scrimmed on Mondays, right? Like
Of
sometimes,
course.
but it would be like 2 games against like, it was normally big, actually, like big from Germany, right? Like
Mm.
it was 2 games against an ERL team who was warming up for their you know game, but never scrimming an LCS, the LEC team. It was never scrimming an LEC team on the Monday, and this was you know, creating an environment, firstly, where a coach is happy to come and say, I want to do this. They're supported. You have new ideas, and you have a flow of new ideas, right? Where there's no blockage, right? There's no obstruction, right, to wanting to try new things, because there's an understanding
Exactly.
that if you want to challenge the best, and I don't mean the best in your region, you want to challenge the best in the world, you need to innovate, right? And you need to create safe spaces for innovation. Like that's
Yeah.
something that, if you ask me what's been my success, so obviously in China I was never in a position to, like, I was just like an analyst, right, or like a scout. But in Brazil and in Europe, if you ask me why do I consider my time in Brazil and Europe to be successful, even though I didn't win a title in Europe, right? Like I did in Brazil, I won, but not in Europe. But I did win a title in NA. It's
Mm.
because I felt that by the time that I left the orgs that I was working with, those processes for self renewal and redevelopment were in place, right? Where
Yeah.
there's no obstructions, there's no, like, there's an understanding that you need to innovate, not just innovate for the sake of innovation, right? But be willing to test new ideas.
Let me put it like this. What just popped into my mind. Like an architect, like you lay out the blueprint, you oversee the machine so everything basically works, right? And then you can safely step away from, like, that's the machine I
Yeah,
want to leave with, and they can tweak it whatever they want, and you have confidence that they will do good with it,
yeah,
right? And
exactly.
then you move on to your new blueprint, your new system, or your
Yeah,
new machine.
yeah. And for me, this doesn't just even have to be a regional thing, right? It can be like a, so when I'm working with in a region, like one thing I'll do a lot is, when I'm scouting players or when I'm scouting coaches, I will talk to a lot of people about them. I'll get references, tons of references from people, which means that always I'll speak to lots of coaches within a region. And, you know, obviously they're giving me something, so I'm giving them something back, right? Like, you know,
Right.
they want to talk about something, you know, I'll talk about ideas, you know, I'll talk about setting up practices. I'll talk about, you know, different ways that they can approach coaching, different ways they can approach problem solving, you know, conflict resolution, that kind of thing within a region. Like, it's just the expectation, right? You give me
Yeah.
some information, I give you some information, right? It's just common courtesy, right? And this I felt that, yeah, I felt that I was able to have more of a positive impact in Brazil and Europe than I was in NA. Like in NA, the
Mm.
systematic issues that I've talked about, you know, especially for things like coach improvement, are
Yeah.
just, it's so rough. Like I sometimes when I'm talking to a coach, like who's a really promising, he's in you know, he's finishing his studies, and he comes and asks me, what can I do to get involved in esports? Like sometimes I just don't even know the advice to give, because the system is so stacked against you. Like I just, Recently,
Mm.
my advice has just been go to Europe, or like go to ERLs if you can afford it, and if you can't, just try to work in conventional sports and transfer across later when your CV looks really good to somebody who's hiring. If they see like you've done
Yeah.
sports coaching, that will help you be involved in esports. But if you're asking, work through the structures that already exist in NA as a coach. If you don't have any like esports coaching background, I don't know what to recommend. And in fact, I think that a lot of that I think maybe in 3 years things will be different, but it's that for me is a failure on my part. It doesn't matter what the results are because I don't feel that I was able to help the region develop in a positive way. Except, yeah, no.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. Jackie Felling had also a couple of ideas.
Oh yeah.
That's what I saw. You say you were a little bit of like vague about it. If I remember on Twitter, but she had some pretty good ideas for NA scene, like development structure. Are you able to share something about that, like how that will look, or?
So I'm not too sure what's tied up in NDAs, but I can comment about things which are public, right? Because then they're in the public domain. So things like moving LCS to weekend evenings, which has a lot of backlash, for instance,
Mm.
right? But in Korea they do this as standard. In LCK, it's the big games. Trying to get a ticket on the weekend is easier than trying to get a ticket on a Monday or Tuesday night. I know. I was in Korea renewing my visa.
Yeah.
It's really impossible. I had to like beg people on the broadcast who thankfully found a way to like help me reserve a ticket. But
Yeah.
I spent 10 days trying to go on the website every single day, even for the less prestigious games. Trying to get a ticket is just impossible, right? And why is that? It's because the schedule for like it's there's a reason that sports schedules, the Champions League in football, there's a
Yeah.
reason it's on a weekend night, right? Like
Yeah.
you know
Everyone is at home,
everyone is
available.
at home, you can watch.
Yeah.
And when that's introduced, what's the first thing that everyone says? Oh, it's a Valorant. Valorant is taking the weekend slot. And but there is solid data that suggests that this is actually a good move, and it's solid data within esports which also suggests that this is a good move. But the natural instinct is to just assume something is to assume something is bad. And what I
Yeah.
would say about Jackie that was very impressive is the she came to all the teams and said, I want to have time to talk to your players. And obviously, you know what League of Legends players are like. It's like, oh, we have to cancel scrims for this nonsense. I
Yeah.
don't want to.
Another interview.
Yeah, no, and it's just a new commissioner. Like, what you
Yeah.
going to do? Like, it's just nonsense. It's just somebody from Riot coming and wasting our time again, right? And she came there, and within 2 hours, like, our players were participating. Really excited about hearing these things. And I can't leak the ideas because
No,
I'm on the
obviously.
but
But there are good things on the
yeah, and
horizon.
good things, and it's even stuff which people may think is bad. Like there's good data behind it, but the thing which concerns me is that this data has always been available. So why has nobody used it before now?
Yeah.
Um, but which is an interesting question for another day, which I don't want to dig into and like get
Yeah.
anyone in trouble, right? But this is kind of, I think, one of the positive things. I think also another thing that's gone public is the changes to the proving grounds format, which is that they're going to have an academy league with
I've
promotion and
seen that. Yeah.
relegation for non-academy teams. This is again really good opportunity for coaches and players because we mentioned Five Fire, right, who had the reputation for being a bit toxic, right? If Five Fire wants to prove himself and he's considered a little bit toxic, again, I don't think he is, but that's his
Yeah.
reputation. And that's stopping him getting onto an academy team. Just get promoted into the academy league and go smash them every week. Somebody will have to listen to you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
there's going to be 6 teams in the academy league, and just be on one of those teams and just keep winning the academy league, and eventually, like maybe you're being kept out of the team because you're not friends with the right people, or like
Right.
all this have concerns, but you beat them enough, and eventually they're going to have to. They're going to
You will
have
get the eyeballs. You will get the eyeballs. They cannot ignore you.
Exactly, which is the thing about EU Masters, and obviously great
Yeah.
opportunity for coaches. For coaches, like
Yeah.
you want to go and win. This is the best way you can do it. There is no other way, and there's benefits as well for players because let's say you are an S tier prospect, you are like guaranteed to go LCS. Like you are like the next Jojo Field. Although Jojo Field, like Jojo Field, nobody likes Jojo Field. Okay, but like you are General Sniper. You're General. Okay, General Sniper.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
General Sniper. Like General Sniper is going LCS in 2 years, right? Like he's not old enough this year, but in 1 year he's old enough and he's going LCS. Nobody knows where he's going, but he's going LCS, right?
yeah,
You don't have to join an amateur team. You don't have to join an academy team to get the same level of practice and exposure. You can just put yourself in one of the like I don't know what they're called, partner teams or whatever. You're not going to
mm,
be locked under a long-term contract. You're not going to be locked under a massive buyout, which of course the academy team will want to have in exchange for developing you, right? You can just give yourself the flexibility and you can go and show your stuff. And I think these kind of changes to the system are really, really valuable.
yeah,
And obviously Champions Queue, the only other thing I would say about Champions Queue is I think fans kind of misunderstand what Champions Queue is for. Champions Queue
mm,
is not so that they can watch their favorite player. It's not so that they can watch Bjergsen versus Jensen or Bjergsen versus Jojo, right? Like every night in their own entertainment, right? It's
mm,
to give opportunities for exposure for people coming up to
exactly.
grind it, and then what they did at Worlds was really smart, where they had a priority queue. Where if you were like an LCS, if you were a Worlds competitor, you would automatically jump to the top of the queue. So what they'll probably do for Champions Queue next year, again, no information, so I can speculate, is they'll probably open it up to more people. There'll be more players invited to Champions Queue, and then LCS players will get like Q bonus, right, which will encourage them to play. But the key point is not that you're there watching Fudge or Bjergsen play every single night. It's that you're watching the potential future people develop, and then people can jump in, and it acts as a
Yeah.
acts
Who smacked Björsen again for the third time in a row, right?
Oh,
That
you
type
know,
of
I mean,
stuff.
isn't that what happened? What was the Players, right? That happened in Players, right? It's how the main character of the Players series got
Yeah.
recognized. But yeah, it's like I think you're seeing the benefits of this now. You know, like somebody like
Yeah.
Yukino Cap will definitely be Academy next. Like I mean, I don't have information, but the fact that he grinded Champions Queue and was really good and was recognized by players, even though he might not have been able to find his way up through the old academy system. Now they play. You can just play with him, right? If you're Impact and you're not sure about how good this guy is, go play with him in Champions Queue, and you'll
Yeah.
quickly see
You'll
if you like
find
him.
out.
Yeah, you'll find out, and you'll find out his personality as well through voice comms. Although not everyone goes voice comms, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean, right? And those kind of any system which gives you an alternative path to recognition and to the top is a good thing in a region like North America, because the current incentives within the North American system don't work in that way,
Yeah.
right? And that's the academy, building the academy team in a certain way, right? Like
Yeah.
that I told you about. You want veterans in your academy team as a coach because you will look better, because you will come higher, right? And that's not good for development within a region, right?
Yeah, we have to figure it out, but having the infrastructure in place is already a great start for everyone to figure out and take the next step into development in general in the NA scene. And hopefully, if that becomes a success, or successful in whatever way might be, that we are in competition with maybe a like EU Master System, ERL system in Europe, so we have not that a separation of like divisions and everyone, so we can develop and foster talent in every ways, and we're more in competition on those structures as well. So it's good, the natural competition type of style in the upcoming years. It will take a while, but we'll get there, right?
And I mean, all I say is I cross my fingers for the world where, obviously I understand why you can't loan players between worlds competing regions, right? Because, like, let's say, you loan JJ, okay, who's like a very competent Chinese jungler, right? You loan him
Mm.
to an NA team, he goes to worlds, and then EDG go and play against that NA team, competing against us.
It's a little bit inside information. It's too much.
Yeah, but so obviously that I understand why that can't happen, but I look forward to a world where you're allowed to like loan players to a non-worlds qualifying region, right? So maybe you could
Mm.
loan a player from LCS to ERLs, right, or vice versa,
Yeah. Oh,
and that kind of thing, is is a good something I hope for as well, which I think can help to development both with players and coaches, right? So,
yeah. Cool. So, Peter, we're heading to the end of this podcast. We're already a couple of minutes in. So, is there one, I don't know, like golden nugget that you want to share when it's about like, esports coaching, development? You talked already about a lot. Is there maybe one final thing or emphasis that you really want to, if there's one thing they cannot forget or start doing or stop doing, what would that be?
I mean, the only thing I can think, I think we've covered pretty much everything that came to my mind immediately, but maybe something like, it's never too late to start diversifying your skill set, right? And if you are like an esports coach and you're an ex-player, think about what your weakness is going to be, right? Your strength is likely to be in game knowledge, right? Let's say, okay, so it will sound like I'm talking to Björksen, but I just mentioned Björksen because he was a player who became a coach. But if you're like a good ex-player and you want to become a coach, maybe consider academic courses in coaching. Maybe consider getting some football coaching badges. Like they're really easy to get. You just go and take some courses, and you do well enough, and you get some badges. But think about diversifying skill sets. Specialization is what will get you to the top, right? It's what will get you in the door. But diversification is what's going to make you a really, really good coach, right?
Right.
So specialize, to get there, then diversify. And what does diversification mean? It means if you're an ex-player working on your coaching skills and having the humility to work with people who are better coaches than you, right? If you are better coaches in general, not in the esports context, right? If you're not an ex-player but you're a very experienced coach, then what's your weakness going to be? It's going to be game knowledge, right? There's just no way, right? There's no way that there's not enough time in the week for you to be better than 5 players who play at an LCS or an LEC level at their roles. You can maybe be as good as one of them, right? If you spend all your time.
Exactly. But all roles,
all 4, it's impossible, right? So think about how you can still contribute, and think about what you can learn, right? It's a two-way process. Impact has probably taught me more about the game than I've taught him, right? I'm not going to say I haven't contributed anything to Impact, right? But obviously he's probably taught me more than I've taught him over the past 2 years. But that's because, in order to do that, you have to be willing to learn from those people. And again, this is an ego thing, right? Like, think about what you can learn, think about how you can learn, and if you're not comfortable from a position of authority, learning from people who are underneath you, because some people aren't, right? Because they worry it challenges their authority, then that's unfortunate, but find another way to learn. Find somebody in a different region. Find somebody in, I frequently talk to people in Europe when I was in NA. I talked to people in Brazil. I talked to people in Vietnam. I talked to people in China. Nobody from Korea, right? Well, I guess Rigby, right? But he was obviously working on EG. But find people outside of your region that you can learn from. If you're not willing, if you don't feel comfortable sharing ideas,
to have those different perspectives.
Yeah, you need those again. That's
a core message. Get those perspectives in.
Get more perspectives.
Let's get it.
And it will challenge you, and challenging yourself, especially when you get to the top, is the hardest thing you can do, right? Because you're automatically working from the assumption these guys are all below me, and there are things you can learn from people who are worse than you, right? Even if it's don't do the thing that they do, right? So that's all I would say. Again, as we're coming to the end, I can see we're almost on 3 hours for what was supposed to be less than 2 hours.
Oops.
So thank you very much for inviting me. It was very interesting talking, and I hope your viewers learn something. Obviously, feel free to reach out to me. For people who are watching, feel free to reach out to me via Twitter DM, which fingers crossed I'll notice, because Twitter are changing a lot of things which are questionable, or find me on Discord, and obviously always happy to discuss coaching ideas.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much. And this was the Next Level Esports podcast, and as well as for you, right, the watcher on YouTube or listener, thank you for tuning in. If you like the podcast, hit the like and subscribe button, or if you want to connect with the Worldwide Coaching Network and learn more about Next Level Esports, then head down to the description below, where you will find a couple of links to get you to know Next Level Esports. My name is Donny, and I see you guys next time. Ciao, ciao.